Hello and welcome to the latest David 67 weekly live stream. Live stream for once a week to have a chat about Celtic things, games ahead, games past, Celtic issues, transfers, players, injuries, etc. All comments welcome. Please do keep your comments, if you can, pleasant, polite, respectful. Do try and keep the no swear word. Keep things very family friendly, and does allow the YouTube to transmit the thing, record it, and let people watch it again. You can be part of it at the on the first day. Do apologise if at times I seem a bit sniffly or my voice goes a bit hoarse, but I do seem to have developed a bit of a cold today. Either that or I've been doing too much hoovering today with too much dust, one thing or the other. Got a wee bit of a choked up nose, a wee bit of a sore throat, so I do apologise if at any point I do appear a bit croaky or snuffly, etc. But hopefully shouldn't affect the conversation. Great one for sharing of opinions. All opinions welcome. Everybody's opinion is correct. It doesn't mean I necessarily will agree with everyone's opinions, and I think there are some areas where I don't strictly toe the party line, toe the majority view, and obviously this week's been rather controversial. A lot of toing and froing between supporters groups, the board, the press, and for me, lots and lots of mainstream media, television stations, radio stations, pundits, newspaper sites, fan sites have been laying into Celtic the football club, Celtic the board, Celtic the fans, Celtic the players and manager. And I think personally, it's a good idea for Celtic fans to club together, Celtic fans to support each other and support the club, because it certainly strikes me that an awful lot of people in mainstream media are trying their hardest to do the club down. So things I thought we might want to talk about would be what we think about the Celtic statement, what we think about the response from several fan groups, talking about things like boycotting part of the game, turning up late for games, going away early for games, not buying tickets for the European matches, not buying tickets for the cup matches, not buying tickets at all for the games, not buying any merchandising, not buying the shirts, and also not cheering during a game, and just in essence complete silence. So there's lots of things to talk about with that one. At the moment, supposedly, Dyson Maida and Brendan Rodgers, and presumably Dyson Maida's agent and Dyson Maida's interpreter, apparently they're having talks over the next day or two about the long-term plan for Dyson Maida at the club. It would appear from interviews in Japanese press during the most recent international break, Dyson Maida was hoping or even expecting to leave the club during the summer transfer window. That's fallen through. And certainly the releases coming out of Celtic Park, if we believe insiders, and I don't tend to believe the insiders terribly often these days because they got an awful lot of the transfer rumours wrong. However, the rumours are that Dyson Maida is staying with Celtic through the rest of the 25-26 season, and then the situation to be reassessed in the summertime. So we'll see whether that actually transpires. One way or another, I think if Dyson Maida is staying, be it until January or be it for the whole season, I think he'll try his absolute hardest. Some people are saying that he looks rather sad, fed up, not trying very hard, but I think Dyson Maida just hasn't been playing at his best form. I think he's been trying as hard as he can. He's shown lots of effort all over the pitch as always, tracking back up and down the left wing, tracking back into midfield and defence. And I think he's been missing chances last season he would have taken. Yep. So nice, nice comment from Pope Leo XIV. Great to have such esteemed subscribers, viewers, commentators on the channel. My personal feeling is that I really want Celtic to win, and I think part of helping Celtic win is being there to cheer them onto the pitch, there to cheer them as they try to score goals, defend goals, pass, etc. And I think it's incredibly important, given how often Celtic get on the front foot ordinarily in the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and take the lead from there. Celtic scored a lot of goals early in the game, a lot of goals in the last 10 minutes. I think Sky a few times has put up the fact that Celtic scored the most goals in the final 10 minutes and added time of any team in Scottish football. And they also, when they're playing at their best, tend to come out in the first 10, 15 minutes and get a great start. And so for me, being there to support the players from half an hour or so before the game starts, supporting them through the whole game, cheering them onto the pitch, cheering them off the pitch, cheering them all the way through the game, and cheering them until the final whistle. I think it's terribly, terribly important. And the last thing I want is, personally, on Sunday when we go to Kilmarnock, is for the Celtic the players to come on to the pitch to warm up to silence, start the game in silence, and then, although that's not the plan apparently for this match, it's a plan for later matches, is silence during the game and leaving the game early, as well as coming into the game late. So I do hope that if any fan protests do occur on Sunday, that it doesn't put the players off, it doesn't affect their performance, because for me, it's important that Celtic get back onto winning ways, back playing good attacking football, and starting to win games again. And for me, start winning games. And I think the fans have a massive part to play in that. I think that everyone's got every right to protest. Everyone's got the right to raise their grumbles. But I do think the number one thing to do as a fan is to support the club one way or another. So, hey to you as well, Sarah, one of my long-term subscribers right back to the start. Another comment there from Anthony Flynn. Not sure if Anthony Flynn's still on, but because he put the comment up a wee bit early on. Hope we can go and win at Killie after all the carry-on. My personal feeling is it's really important Celtic get back on winning ways, get back to confidence, get back to the players playing at their best, playing confidently with pace, etc. And I think the fans do have a part to play in that. Obviously, Brendan Rodgers and the players and the coaches have a much bigger part to play in that than us fans. But I think we can do our little bit be it at Celtic Park, Rugby Park, or any of the other away venues to help them win their games. Just one wee couple of thoughts that I've been having in preparation for the game at Kilmarnock on Sunday. The game will be live on Sky Sports. Celtic obviously do have a few issues going into this game in terms of possible injuries in both our fullbacks, and also some uncertainty over the full match fitness of players like Chiniecki and Iheanacho. Chiniecki obviously signed just at the very, very end of the international break, whilst many of the squad were away on international duty just starting off. Chiniecki came in, signed his contract, had his medical, did all the PR stuff and photographs, and then flew back out to join the Tunisian international squad. So, in essence, he had absolutely no time with anybody at Celtic Park before he flew back off to the Tunisian international camp. He had an international for them where they were qualified for the World Cup. Had an international, I think it was on Tuesday, their game, Monday or Tuesday. Then obviously he would have been flying back from there into Scotland, probably arriving Wednesday or possibly even today, Thursday. And so obviously not really had very much time with his teammates. So quite whether Brendan Rodgers feels that he's fit to start the game, not so much in terms of fitness, but mostly due to whether he's actually got to know any of his teammates to any real extent or got used to the Brendan Rodgers way of playing football. Obviously, Kelechi Iheanacho, another player where there are some concerns about match fitness. In essence, in terms of actual fitness, he should be 100% fit. He played some international matches for Nigeria in May time. Then he had his wee summer holidays. Then he was back into pre-season training with Sevilla, full pre-season training leading into whole series of pre-season friendlies. He played half a game for Sevilla in 4 or 5 friendly games, and then didn't play again in any competitive matches for Sevilla. However, did have a full pre-season, 4 or 5 halves of football for Sevilla, and then joined us the day after the transfer window shut. So my thoughts. Just one other wee thing, just whilst I'm remembering. Some Celtic media sites are saying that Anthony Ralston was seen at Lennoxtown today in a protective walking boot, moon boot type thing. And so there are some concerns that his ankle injury, foot injury that he picked up in Kazakhstan in the ill-fated second leg, that then caused him to drop out the international squad for Scotland. Some suggestions that he might not be match fit for the game against Kilmarnock on Sunday. Obviously, we'll find out tomorrow in Brendan Rodgers' press conference whether Ralston's fit and whether Kieran Tierney's fit. No mention of Kieran Tierney being in any form of walking boot or any update from anybody regarding Kieran Tierney not being fit to play. My suspicion is with Kieran Tierney, it was more a bit of boot bruising and swelling, a bit of soft tissue injury, and nothing of any great consequence. And given the fact that Scotland actually have rather a lot of left backs and left-sided defensive players, I think that was part of the reason why Tierney dropped out. Obviously, Scotland have Andy Robertson. They then brought up Josh Doig. They had several players they could play in a left back, left wing back, left centre back role. And so I don't think a combination of Rodgers or Stevie Clark thought it was worthwhile risking Kieran Tierney in the games against Denmark and Belarus. So I think he came back to Celtic for a bit of physio, a bit of treatment, and I'm sure he's going to be ready to play on Sunday. So this would be my predicted lineup for the game on Sunday. Do feel free to pop your own thoughts into the comment section. So Schmeichel in goals, obviously. Ralston at right back, but if he's not fit, then Colby Donovan. Centre backs, Carter Vickers and Scales as always. Kieran Tierney at left back. However, if he is injured, Sirachi can step in quite easily. I think he'll go back to his midfield of McGregor, Negrin and Hattati. I think he'll start with Dyson Maida through the middle. Barlaquisha on the left and either Forrest or Yang on the right. One of the slight conundrums Rodgers will have to solve is that Taniecki and Barlaquisha can play both right side and left side. They both tend to prefer to play left side. Dyson Maida obviously tends to prefer to play left side, although he can play right side as well. Barlaquisha, Taniecki tends to be much more two-footed than Barlaquisha or Dyson Maida, and so he does have the ability, if he is playing up and down the left, to cut in on his right foot or hit the byline with his left foot. And so maybe Tuniek is going to be the number one choice at left wing. So we'll see what happens with that. So Maida in the middle, Barlaquisha on the left, and Forrest or Yang starting on the right. And then when Brendan Rodgers does his substitutions, which is always at 60 minutes, he always brings his first set of substitutions on if it's inverted commas for tactical reasons. I suspect Einac will come on centrally. Janiecki will go over to the left. Maida will go over to the right. And we'll take it from there. Yep. I think there's lots of them. So Paul McCune make a brilliant point. I think there's lots and lots of different theories. Starting Iheanacho from the start. I personally, if Brendan Rodgers started the game with, let's say, Maida on the right, Balakush on the left, and Iheanacho through the middle, I think that would go perfectly fine. He looked really, really fit in the video training that Celtic released from a couple of days ago. It looked like he was fitting in really well with Brendan Rodgers, looked like he was fitting in really well with all the squad players who were there training on, I think it was Monday or Tuesday. So I wouldn't have any qualms with starting Iheanacho on Sunday. I think there's lots of different options. I think a lot of Celtic fans and a lot of club football fans don't like international football. I quite like watching Scotland play or other internationals play, but my ultimate worry always is that one of our players is going to get injured and be out for weeks and weeks. Or if you think about a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, Lila Bada went off to play for Israel in international and missed the next 5 months of football. So that's my biggest worry, is that our players get injured on international breaks. Paulo Bernardo, since Paulo Bernardo got bought by Celtic, he seems to have become very much the forgotten man. I don't think Brendan Rodgers quite knows where to play Paulo Bernardo. Theoretically, he is a bit more of an attacking midfielder, which is where he tended to play for the Portuguese under-21 team when he was captaining that side. Celtic have tended to play him more as a conventional midfielder, even a defensive midfielder. He stepped into the Callum McGregor role a few times, but we don't seem to quite know where to put. We don't seem to quite know quite where to put Paulo Bernardo. I think he's a really talented player, and when he was getting a series of games in a row for Celtic, he certainly did a great job. Yep, totally agree, Lorden. It's good to get back to club football. I think Celtic's been through rather a difficult time on and off the pitch. We've had our last 3 games have been rather awful, boring, depressing 0-0 draws. The 2 0-0 draws with Kira Almaty, then coming back from those 0-0 draw with our big rivals Rangers. Some of the worst games of football I've ever watched in my life. Those 2 Almaty games and the Rangers game, I think, was one of the most terrible games of football that I've ever seen at professional level. A game with hardly any proper chances, not an awful lot of argy-bargy, very little controversy, and all things considered, not very good football. So totally agree, Lauren. Great to get back into club football. The other team that Lauren and I support is the women's side. They had a very disappointing game against their big rivals again on Sunday, but they still do remain second top of the table, and they still seem to be making signings for their team. So that's good. Stephen makes a good point regarding that. Certainly it looked like Celtic and many supporters associations and fan groups and stuff had a nice meeting on, I think it was a Friday. Lots of exchange of views, and then the Celtic team released its statement. The Celtic board and the club, etc., released its statement. I personally do think that, and maybe I'm in a minority of one, I do think the Peter Lawwell and Michael Nicholson's and Mackay, the chief financial officer, and the other board members, the non-executive board members, I think they will take all these things on board, but I think they are bound by a lot of rules that we as fans don't understand. I think they are talking about being more open. I think they're talking about lots of very good things. The conclusion to their statement, I thought, was so we thank the Celtic supporters for their unmatched passion and commitment. We all share in the same ambition to see Celtic succeed on the pitch while remaining strong and secure off it. We hope this statement provides clarity about our transfer policy and reassurance on our unwavering dedication to Celtic's short, medium, and long-term success. So I don't think anybody could argue that's not the kind of things they should be saying. We then have to decide whether we believe them or not. I genuinely think that the board are trying to do their best to get Celtic to keep on moving forward. I certainly didn't. I was surprised, having read the statement, to hear a lot of Celtic fans saying that it was, what are we, insulting, condescending, dismissive, belittling. I certainly would agree with another comment, which was business speak, which, after all, these are businessmen. They are running a business, like it or not. I know Celtic is a football club. It's got a massive long history. It means an awful lot to us, but it is actually a public limited company declared on the stock exchange, shareholders, investors. It's multi-million pound turnovers. So in some ways, the statement that they put out was both for the fans, obviously, and also it was to give some reassurance to shareholders, stockholders, investors, and other people who have an interest in Celtic. So I think all these things are important. There were one or two wee areas that a lot of people took a lot of consternation to. The bit about the financial fair play, sustainability regulations. Well, Celtic do actually have to abide by those regulations. We do have to abide by those. And I do actually have a wee screen I'll put up in a wee minute or two that maybe just illustrates some of the issues that the board have been trying to deal with considering Celtic as a business from 22-23 to 23-24 and now into 24-25. Yes, so I completely agree, Stephen. We as fans want the club to be all about the history of Celtic, unparalleled history of Celtic. One of the things that I have always loved about Celtic is the fact that it's a very, very welcoming club, and that no matter your religion or anything about your skin colour, your religion, your nationality, your origins, Celtic was a very, very welcoming club. Celtic has an incredible record for being one of the first ever clubs to do various different things. We were the first club in the history of European football to have a Muslim player. We had a couple of players who were of Indian subcontinent origin quicker than any other British football club had ever done. So Celtic broke the ways, it broke the rules, broke all the boundaries in terms of religion, skin colour, nationality, bringing players in from abroad, giving everybody a chance to play football. So it's one of the great things about Celtic. I think we do have to actually recognise that football clubs these days, if they're going to succeed, have to be run as businesses. 30 odd years ago, Celtic were within days of going bankrupt. In those days, we weren't very well run off the pitch financially, which is why we got into massive debt. We weren't actually successful on the pitch at the same time. And we have to balance up having a football club that has money and has the ability to keep on progressing, again with delivering on the pitch. Yes, that's another. Well, my feeling, and again, this is my feeling. Everybody's entitled to their own feeling about telling Celtic fans what they can and cannot do in terms of how they support their club. What's going to happen if, let's say, 200 people from one supporters bus want to go in half an hour before? Are the majority fans who are going to be there? Are they going to stop Celtic fans going in? Are they going to start shouting and swearing at them? Goodness knows. My other thought is if there are several thousand Celtic fans all going in 12 minutes after the game's kicked off, that's going to cause massive problems for the stewards. It's going to cause massive problems for the police. It's going to cause potentially massive security damage, security risks. Same way if they do go ahead with walking out of the game with 10 minutes to go in future matches, as is one of the several things that are proposed, that again has the lots of fans leaving the ground, some fans not leaving the ground. What if Celtic do score a goal with 1 minute to go and there's all these fans on the stairs, leaving, coming, some want to go back in to see what's happened? There could be quite really major, dangerous things happening with fans coming and going, disputes between some fans leaving and not leaving. That's why I don't really like the thought of people coming in late or leaving early in masses and masses, because it does cause massive problems for stewards, massive problems for the police, big security safety risks for fans coming and going, and also the prospect of people disputing with other fans. Certainly, if we think about our rivals from across the city, there was quite a lot of animosity when some fans were leaving, some fans weren't leaving, some fans were taking part in the protests against their previous manager and previous board and so on, and that caused an awful lot of internal conflict. And my personal feeling is the only people who will benefit from Celtic fans turning on other Celtic fans are Rangers, Hibs, Hearts, etc., and our European opponents, rather. Yes, so Stephen, I was just thinking that I was out doing the supermarket shopping today, and driving back, I thought, because I'd heard it on the radio news, what the plans the Green Brigade and the boys and stuff were having. I thought to myself, I have only ever left one game early in my whole life, which is the best part of 50 odd years supporting Celtic and Scotland. And that was a game between Scotland and Austria, the best part of 50 years, 45 years ago. And the only reason that me and my dad left is because people were peeing on us and pouring cans of beer on us. And we thought we'd rather go back to the house, and we were staying in Glasgow on holidays, and watch the game live on television for the second half. So that's the only game I've ever walked out of early in my life. Yep, I can understand why people have every right to protest. They've got every right to do what they feel is the best way for them to voice their concerns, voice their protests. I just have a lot of concerns about fan safety, of some fans leaving the ground, some fans not leaving the ground, maybe some fans coming back into the ground if they have left early if there's a big cheer goes up. I live in a little rural village where, not to be too depressing, but a long time ago when there was the Ibrox disaster, a minibus of kids went from this village. Some were Celtic supporters, some were Rangers supporters, and they travelled all the way from our wee village across to Glasgow together, singing songs, chanting, debating, having a great fun of having two supporter groups chatting with each other. Half of the boys went to one end of the ground, the other boys went to the other end of the ground, and of course, at the end of that game, 4 or 5 boys, maybe 6 boys, I think, from my little village that I'm now living in, never came back because they died in the Ibrox disaster. And that caused massive problems in the village primary school and the local high school, because all those boys were a part of the same local village football teams, scout teams, cub teams, school teams, etc. So the last thing I want is fans leaving and coming and trampling each other and causing major problems or causing massive headaches for the stewards, the police, etc. Yep. So I think fan safety is really important. I think also the safety of police and stewards who are trying to do their job. If there's like 3,000-4,000 fans come in 12 minutes into the game, it's going to cause massive issues, I think, personally, for keeping fan safety. There's a chance if the police and stewards are trying to control that people might start losing their temper, etc. So I think it's a major issue. Yep. Yeah. So Tone, as I said, one of my dad's friends through another village where I used to live, and one of his best friends was one of the boys who was on that bus going from my village where I live now to Glasgow with Rangers fans. And every year he's part of a Celtic supporters group in the big town near where I live. But every year he and his Celtic supporter club members who are in our wee locality do put a wreath, etc., onto the memorial of those boys that died in Ibrox. So, for me, that is really important. Also, as a Liverpool fan, obviously for me, Hillsborough is a major thing. Heysel disaster, another thing. So, fan safety for me is so important, which is why I've got a lot of concerns over the potential. Sorry, Coyote Mike. There's rather a lot of comments. I'll do my best to answer as best I can. I am. So, if the question, Coyote Mike, was, do you think we have enough depth to put up a fight in the Europa League? My personal opinion is yes. I think Celtic do have, if they keep their current players fit, I think Celtic do have a squad that can do well in the Europa League. I think if you look at our defence so far, with Schmeichel, combination of Ralston and Johnston at right back, Carter Vickers, Scales, centre backs, and a mixture of Tierney and Austin Trusty and Liam Scales as left backs. We've only conceded 1 goal all season in all the games. No goals in the 4 league matches. No goals in the 2 Champions League qualifiers. Only goal we conceded was when we had Viljami Sinisalo on goals for the League Cup. So our defence looks good. If the midfield 3 or 4, depending on who we choose to play there, start to do their job, if McGregor starts to be a proper captain, if Hatate gets consistency, if Negrin adapts from being primarily a wide player or a striker, which is what he's played previously and most of the time in Danish and Swedish football, if he adapts to being a central midfielder, which is where Rodgers wants him to play, if he adapts fully to that role, which he's done off and on, I think we've got a really powerful midfield, goal scorers in Negrin and Hatate. We've got wide players. I think Balikwisha and Tuniecki are going to be really good players after a bit of time to settle in. Dyson Maeda, if he gets back to his best form, I think he is a person who'll score a ton of goals in Scotland and he'll score goals in Europe. Kelechi Iheanacho scored lots of goals for Leicester in Premier League. Had a bit of a lull when he went to Spain. I think if he gets back to the kind of player he was in his best years at Leicester, he's still only 28 years old, so still good enough. I think Johnny Kenny and Shin Yamada are both players who can score goals in Scottish football. I think Shin Yamada scored a ton of goals in Japanese football. He wasn't in the most recent Japanese squad that Dyson Maeda was, but he was in the previous Japanese squad during the summers. So obviously he's considered one of the best half a dozen strikers in Japanese football, and that's actually quite a hard club to get into. He's rated by the Japanese manager ahead of Kyogo currently. So I do think Celtic has got the squad to do it. I think we've got some good backup players in people like Engels, Paulo Bernardo, Luke McCowan. I think James Forrest will always do a good job for us. I think we've got some talented young players, Dane Murray, Cobley Donovan, particularly. I think Marcello Sirachi, good player as well. However, what it's going to take for Celtic to do well in Europe is for us to get back to the kind of team spirit, team morale that we had in much of the Champions League games last season. I think a lot of the teams that we did well against in last year's Champions League are the sorts of teams, that kind of level, are the ones we'll have to beat to progress in the Europa League. So we had a good result against Young Boys Bern, Bruges, Bratislava. We had a good result against Dinamo Zagreb. We got a bit of a surprisingly good result against Leipzig. We got a very good battling draw in Atalanta. We got absolutely gubbed by Dortmund. We got beaten 4-2 by Villa. We then took on Bayern Munich, one of the best teams in Europe, and lost to them 3-2 over a two-legged tie. So I think if Celtic do get back to the team spirit, the team morale that they had last season in the Champions League, I think they certainly can do. Interestingly, a supercomputer was predicting Celtic's chance of getting through the group stage of the Europa League coming up. It said that Celtic's got a 52.8% chance of at least getting to the playoff and a 17.8% chance of qualifying in the top 8 and thus getting a bye to the last 16. So it's saying that Celtic's got an over 70% chance of getting to playoff round 1 or straight into playoff round 2. Rather bizarrely, and I think this is massively overambitious, it said Celtic had a 4.1 chance of getting to the final and a 1.8 chance of getting to being the winner. If we would do, however, think several years ago, about 3-4 years ago, our big rivals from across the city, they did get to the Europa League final. They lost on penalties to Eintracht Frankfurt. So I think certainly Celtic's side of current times, if they keep fit and fresh and get their team morale and confidence back, are good enough to make a lot of progress in the Europa League. My personal feeling is that if they perform at their potential, at their best, last 8 is certainly something to aspire to. However, as Lauren was saying, that's based on how they should be able to play, how they have played briefly in patches this season, how they played in a lot of patches last season, the kind of form that had them beating Leipzig, drawing with Bayern Munich and Munich, thumping Bratislava, etc., and doing very well against Atalanta. Yeah, so there are quite a lot of different executive members and non-executive members of the board. Some are much more apparent to us, some less apparent. There are a couple of people who are actually major shareholders in the club who have chosen not to be board members, even though their share ownership does actually qualify them to be on the board. They've chosen not to be part of the board. Not everybody likes putting themselves forward to being putting themselves forward. And we'll come back to a bit about the board. Yes, so there are a lot of names who are shareholders, major investors in Celtic that are quite anonymous. There are a couple of very, very rich businessmen who are big shareholders in Celtic but choose not to be on the board. But obviously, with 10 to 15% of the shares of the club, they do have quite a financial clout. There are some very, very high-powered American banks, European banks, British banks, financial companies, investors who are invested in Celtic. Celtic is a very popular share to invest in if you are a person looking to make money. So it's seen as being a very good financial risk. It's a share, a company that's going to keep on doing well. So there are many, many good things to being Celtic. Having that high level of investment, high level of business confidence does mean that Celtic are always going to have potentially access to additional funds if that was ever required, such as expanding the stadium, improving seating, improving IT, creating a second stadium within the Celtic Park area such as for the academy to play in, or the women's team, or to have as a warm-up venue for the players rather than using Celtic Park for training on, etc. for teams prior to games at Celtic Park. So having those extra board members, so those extra funding is very important. Just a one wee thing that I looked at in preparation were a number of the things that the board were kind of talking about as being something they have to always bear in mind. So comparing the finances of 22-23 to 23-24, because obviously the finances for 24-25, which is last season, won't come to light until next AGM because of the fact that all financial things are a year behind. But over the spell of 22-23 to 23-24 financial statements, Celtic's profits dropped from 40 odd million to 17.8 million. The revenue went up by 5 million to 120, but most of that was the Champions League money that we got. And obviously that was doubled up because of 2 years in a row. And obviously this year that money's not going to be the case. Salaries went up 4.6 million between 22-23 and 23-24. That's going to go up even more because we've had a lot more players on even higher salaries. So people such as Maeda, Hatate, Carter Vickers all got big upgrades. Alistair Johnston got a big upgrade. That brought a lot of them up to near the levels of Callum McGregor. We've obviously just this summer added on. Some people are saying £50,000 a week for Kieran Tierney. Jota thought to be something like £40,000 a week since January. So the wage bill is going to go up and up and up. And that is something they have to also worry about and keep in mind. Over the course of 22-23, 23-24, the operational expenses went up by £9 million to £117 million. So that's things that Celtic are spending to run the club, for groundsmen, transport, other resources that they're buying. And apparently most of that expenses went up due to inflation because things are just costing more now because of the way that the general economy is. Retail income went up by just under £1 million, but the matchday income came down by 1.4 million, and something just a bit of relevance to the financial sustainability rules. Celtic's percentage of wages to revenue is now 53%. Now that's way short of the 70% But if revenue drops, as would be expectable with this season, because we don't have the Champions League prize money or the Champions League TV money, revenue is going to come down and down. The wages are going up and up and up because the contracts are all long-term contracts. So Tierney, I think it was a 4-year contract at £50,000 a week. That's a heck of a lot of money that Celtic's committed to him. Jota was a 5 or 6 year contract at rumoured to be £40,000 a week. We'll find out next April what everybody's actually on. McGregor, Carter Vickers, they're thought to be the very high 30s. Maeda's up that level as well. Hatati's up that level as well. So basically, Celtic have got a rising wage bill and revenue that's certainly going to go down this year, and might keep on going down. Things like inflation means that people are less able to buy things potentially, less able to commit so much money for season tickets, Europa League ticket packages, etc. So in essence, the board does have to balance up potentially dwindling revenue, which will definitely dwindle this year because of failing to get into the Champions League, and a rising wage bill, and that's an inevitable thing with trying to recruit players like Jota, Tierney, and keep players like Carter Vickers, Maeda, McGregor, Johnson, etc. at the club. One other wee thing which I found interesting, other people might not find interesting, we'll get back to football things, and it was something I think somebody was talking a bit about last week, in terms of things like not buying Celtic merchandise, not buying Celtic food and drink at the venue. Now, a bit of research regarding that. Celtic actually don't do their own food. Their food is actually subcontracted to a British and European company called Sodexo. So they run all the food and drink kiosks and restaurants and stuff on behalf of Celtic. So obviously there'll be a profit sharing thing with them. They're a big employer of people all over Scotland in terms of lots of different sports venues and other things that they do. They do school food. They do lots of amazing things. Lots of different things. Anyway, they're big employers. So if Celtic did start not having so much need for food and stuff, it's going to mean people being laid off, a lot of seasonal contact. So just coming back to what I was going to talk about, someone was talking about the amount of money that Celtic make off of selling replica shirts. So I just thought it'd be interesting to do a bit of research regarding that. So apparently an average cost for a replica shirt for a big football team is £80 in shops and online. Now, of that £80, £23.47 goes to Adidas, who make the shirts, who are the shirt manufacturer. So about over a quarter of the price of that £80 goes back to Adidas, who are the shirt manufacturers. £4.80 always goes to Celtic out of that £80 because that's all to do with licensing and image rights and stuff for Celtic. £26.40 goes to the retailer. Now, if you buy it from a Celtic Superstore, Celtic Online, etc., that £26.40 goes to the Celtic shop, so it comes back to the club. But if you buy it from JD Sports, Amazon, any other seller, that price goes to the person who sells the shirt rather than coming back to the club. £13.33 goes to VAT, so customs and to the government, and £4 goes for distribution costs and marketing costs, and £8 goes to the people who actually make the shirt in the first place. So although Adidas are the manufacturer, the shirts are actually made physically in countries all around the world, and the factory who makes the shirt gets £8 a shirt from the £80. So again, if we're not buying football shirts, Celtic certainly do get punished. Lots and lots of other people get punished as well. So Celtic get £4.80 from every shirt that's sold, and Celtic get more if the shirt is bought from a Celtic Superstore. So it's just there's lots and lots of different ways of voicing our thoughts and voicing our protest, etc. Don't know if other people found that as interesting as me, but I found it interesting. So, sorry, I got a wee bit behind with all the. That's a really so the 210 minutes plus the 30 minutes or so of watching the penalty shootout is certainly minutes of my life I'd like to get back. I had a horrible feeling when we got to the second leg that things were not going to go well. I was obviously praying and hoping and wearing my lucky shorts and wearing my lucky top and everything. But none of that worked, and had it not been for Dies and Maida missing two brilliant chances, we would have been through into the Champions League, and things probably on the pitch and off the pitch would have been so much happier. So, but I'm fully sure that Dies and Maida will start scoring those goals for us again. But it would be really nice to get those minutes of my life back as well, and hopefully Kilmarnock is the start of the turnaround in Celtic's fortunes. Yeah, green for goal. Couldn't agree more. That's totally correct. Thing that really struck me about the two Kerry Almaty games, and for that matter, the Rangers game, is we didn't change one single wee thing. We changed a few players. It was like moving deck chairs around on the Titanic. It wasn't actually changing things. Why, we've got the players actually who can play a variety of different systems. We've got players who actually could play happily as wing backs. James Forrest is a winger, but he's often played at various times in his career as a wing back. Kieran Tierney certainly can play as a wing back. Sarachi could play as a wing back. Dyson Maida is now playing as a wing back for Japan. We've got players who can play all over the pitch. We've got Negan who can play 3 or 4 different positions. Balakwisha, he wasn't part of that squad, but he will be in Europa League. Tuniecki, again, variety of different positions. We've got players like Shin Yamada, who plays primarily through the middle, but he can play out wide, a bit like Kyogo used to be able to do now and again. We've got Scales, who plays a centre-back. We've got Scales who can play left-back. We've got players who can play 3 at the back, 5 at the back. And the way that Almaty were attacking, we didn't need to have 4 defenders defending. We could easily have pushed up Ralston and Tierney, Ralston, or later on Donovan and Scales, but we didn't. We could have gone 2 strikers. We didn't. We did nothing different. It was the same boring rubbish tactics. I don't know whether people are happy that Ange Postecoglou has got his job at Nottingham Forest. I hope he really has a great time. Hope he does succeed at. Hope that Ange Postecoglou really succeeds at Nottingham Forest. I'm not convinced that Ange's way of playing football and the way that their chairman thinks football should be played, or the fact that the chairman seems to think that he's got every right to tell the manager who to pick and how to pick the team, etc. So it may be that Ange Postecoglou is available at the end of the 25-26 season, when I have absolutely no doubt that Rodgers will be off to pastures new. I said right at the start of the season, I actually said last season in various different replies and comment sections and stuff, that I thought Rodgers was coming to Celtic for 3 years and not staying any longer than that. I think it was actually Chris Sutton was saying in the press today that he really wished that Brendan Rodgers had done a Jurgen Klopp and said, at the start of what proved to be Jurgen Klopp's last season, Jurgen Klopp said, "This is my last season at Liverpool. I'm leaving at the end of the season." That then allowed Liverpool to start recruiting a new manager. They then got one of the most up-and-coming best managers in Europe to come and be their manager. Not saying Celtic can do that, but certainly Celtic could start laying the ground. Someone I think was suggesting one of the Norwegian or Swedish managers. I think it's maybe the Bodo Glimt manager. he was actually rumoured to be one of the managers that Celtic were looking at before we appointed Brendan Rodgers. Just to So I can't find. I think someone was suggesting the Bodo Glimt manager. I think that would be a good option. They generally play quite good attacking football. There we are. So Paul McEwen was suggesting Knutson. I think that's not the biggest expert on Norwegian football, but pretty sure that's the manager of Bodo Glimt. They've obviously had big success last year in Europa League. They're in the Champions League for this season. They tend to be a team that's been very, very good at doing something that I think Celtic should be doing far better. Bodo Glimt's been very, very good at developing young Norwegian talent, bringing through talented kids, teenagers, schoolboys, kids, etc., into their academy teams, from the academy team into the first team to becoming big stars, and then moving them on to other clubs, but also having this like conveyor belt of young players always coming into the place. Other young players, that helps you so much with things like the UEFA quota system of homegrown players and club-grown players. And it's something that Celtic haven't been doing very well. We tend, every sort of Champions League or Europa League squad, we tend to scrabble around trying to find players to fit into the various different categories. And we've not done a very good job of bringing through our own. Yes. So the fact that Angie has now been employed by Nottingham Forest does actually suggest that we've got a lower chance of getting him to come back. A lot of people say that Ange Postecoglou never believes in going back to any job or anywhere, so it may have been a bit of a false hope. Well, certainly, I would suspect that the whatever wages and salary someone is on at managing in Norwegian football, if he was offered the same contract that Brendan Rodgers is getting, which is £3 million a year, I think a lot of managers, possibly not the absolute elite European managers, but I think an awful lot of managers would bite off Celtic's hand if they were offering £2-3 million a year. So I think certainly giving Knutson that kind of offer, I'm sure he would jump at the chance to come to Celtic. And I think he actually would be, from the way he plays football, his mentality, also his belief in bringing through young players, I think it would be a very good move for Celtic. And as I say, it was somebody who was rumoured to be on the short list last time around before we went for Brendan Rodgers. And Brendan Rodgers, £3 million a year, which means he is actually the highest paid person at Celtic in terms of salary. If Kieran Tierney is on, as is rumoured, £50,000 a week, that would be £2.5 million per year, so less than Rodgers. People like Michael Nicholson, the Chief Financial Officer Mackay, they are on nowhere near as much money as that. They're on hundreds of thousands, not 3 million like Brendan Rodgers. So it probably is time for Brendan Rodgers to give us £3 million worth per year of management and coaching, and get the players playing at their best, get the team moving forward, and get them playing good football, which Celtic have played good football over the last 2 years of Brendan Rodgers. We played, I thought, better football under Ange Postecoglou, but there have been many spells in Rodgers' 2 and a bit seasons where Celtic has played really good football. We'll see that Lauren makes a really good point. I would tend to agree that potentially the Nicholsons and Lawwells and Dermot Desmonds and so on will have a wee bit of a job to convince people. However, they could point to the fact that Celtic did, in the 24-25 season, spend £39.3 million on players. So the trustees, the Jotas, the Idas, the Engels, etc., etc. We spent £39.3 million on players to bring them in. We did get £48.6 million selling players that same two transfer windows, 24-25, 25-26, so the one just finished. We bought players at 13.1 million players. We did get 12 players for that. Some of the players, had we bought them from actual money, they would have been a heck of a lot more expensive. The deal to bring Negri into the side was a tremendous bargain. A player valued much, much higher, except there Midtjylland needed to sell him. He was in the last year of his contract, so Celtic got him for a bargain price. And I'm sure there are thousands of us who, when Amazon has their sales, or there's Christmas sales or New Year's sales or summer sales, we're all very happy to buy whatever for £10 off. So I don't have a problem with Celtic being sensible in the transfer market, buying players in the last year of their contract. They're much more likely to come to a club as well. So I think there is swings and roundabouts, and Celtic did sign a lot of players this summer. We got rid of a heck of a lot of players. We made a lot of money from selling Kuhn, especially. We made a bit of money back on selling Lagbielka and Tilio. Made a wee bit of money selling off Kwon, not nearly as much as I think we could have done had we kept hold of him and given him a chance to play football. So you could, so to answer Lauren's point, one could say that we did give the manager £39.3 million to buy players in the 24-25 season. Admittedly, we got more money back in players that we sold, but we did shell out the best part of £40 million for players in the 24-25 season. So that was last season. We spent another 13.1. We got in a lot of actual current internationals. We got a couple of players in amongst that who are players to develop into big stars. So personally, Lauren, I think Celtic will be able to attract a good level of manager. I think that a lot of managers these days are a bit more savvy of all the financial sustainability rules. A lot of managers in the English Premier League at the moment are particularly having to deal with all the issues of player development, revenue, sales, wages, etc. So some of the clubs, Newcastle to an extent, Aston Villa, Everton, Man City seem to have got away pretty scot-free with a lot of their indiscretions. But I think a lot of managers these days are starting to be more aware. So Kasper Schmeichel came to us for nothing because his contract with in Belgium had expired. So he did come to Celtic for absolutely nothing in the summer of 23-24. There's a lot of conjecture as to how much Kasper Schmeichel's actually getting paid. Some suggestions are he's up towards the higher level of Celtic's wage earners. Some are suggesting he's down in the £15,000 to £20,000 a year, so not one of the higher earners. So Kasper Schmeichel again had been buying him from Anderlecht. We would have been shelling out a few £1 million to buy him, even though he is in his late 30s. We got him for nothing because his contract with that club was up. We signed him on a 1-year contract, which then rolled over to another year, potentially could keep on rolling over. And I think someone else was pointing out that signing Kelechi Iheanacho on that 1 year with a 1-year option is actually a very good move, I think, personally. If he does turn out well for Celtic, he's highly likely come January time to say, great, I'm really enjoying Celtic. It's been brilliant scoring goals again. It's been brilliant playing in European football. I've regained my place in the Nigerian squad. I'm happy to sign another year or 2 years or 3 years. He is only 28 at the moment, so no real reason why we couldn't extend Kelechi Iheanacho for 2-3 years. He's younger than Kyogo was when we had Kyogo the last couple of seasons. He's obviously younger than Forrest, younger than McGregor, younger than quite a few players on the side. But certainly at 28, he's still a youngish man. He's still in a good part of his career. So he's not like a Dion Dublin or a Ian Wright or several others that we signed who were kind of over the hill when we signed them. Yes, I think that what did surprise me about the transfer window just shut is that we didn't actually really look at getting someone in. It would appear to be the Callum McGregor in the long run. The worst story is that that's what Arnie Engels was for. The worst story is that's what Paulo Bernardo was for. We don't seem to really have addressed a defensive midfielder, number 6 type role. Now, I can't remember who exactly it was, but I was watching someone else's live stream podcast video type thing, and they were suggesting that a player like Hayato Inamura could well be developed so he came to Celtic as sort of a left centre-back, left-back hybrid, with the quality of Inamura's passing, which he really showed to great extent in Japanese football in those 2 half seasons. He is a player, given he's got good defensive abilities, but not the greatest of defenders, but he's a brilliant, brilliant passer. And he always does tend to keep on looking forward with these passes. He isn't someone that, in the games I've watched him play, whose first thought, as it often is with Scales and Carter Vickers and Ralston, which is to pass it back to McGregor or to pass it back to Kasper Schmeichel. Hayato Inamura, much like Tierney and Greg Taylor before him, tends to always try and make that forward pass first. So one thought would be using Hayato Inamura as a person to move into that defensive midfield role. Thoughts about dropping Arnie Engels back, thoughts about dropping Paulo Bernardo, but it would appear at the moment as if McGregor's fit, Rodgers plays him in the number 6, and nobody else really gets a chance. Now, Paul McEwen, Lennon Miller, I think, would have been a great player for Celtic to sign. Now, a couple of my nephews know friends of Lennon Miller because they all went to the same school together. Apparently, the friends of my nephews who are friends also of Lennon Miller have said that he never wanted to keep on playing in Scottish football. His plan was, after a few years of playing in Scottish football for Motherwell or whomever, his plan was then to move either down south to England or more preferentially going off to play in European football. And he seems to have joined the massive Scottish exodus to Italian football that's worked out for quite a number of different players. So it would appear from if the friends of my nephews who are friends of Lennon Miller are to be believed, Lennon Miller never wanted to come to Celtic, never wanted to come to Rangers. It was never, ever in his mind to do that. He would have happily stayed at Motherwell for another season playing for them rather than coming to Celtic or Rangers or whomever. His idea was always go to England, of which there were a few offers but nothing strong. But then there were several offers to go to Italy. So that's why he jumped ship and went to Italy this summer. But he, a bit like Kasper Dolberg, apparently had said he wasn't going to go to certain clubs. He wasn't going to go to certain leagues. And his plan was to go to Europe or to England. So I don't think, actually, if those stories are to be believed, that Lennon Miller was ever a goer for coming to Celtic. He didn't want to come to keep on playing in Scotland, basically. He wanted to move to a bigger, richer, more prestigious league. Yeah. It's so, yes, so my personal feeling is if fans choose to not buy the Europa League package, say, I said in the video today's video, that Celtic's Europa League package is actually the cheapest of all the British clubs in the Europa League. It's significantly less than Rangers, significantly less than Villa and Notts Forest, so and is less than often they charge for things. So whether that's a sign that the board and the finance people and the Michael Nicholsons are listening to the fans about ticket prices and Europa League package prices as well. Things like food and drink, that's partly, so Celtic get part of that money. A lot of the money then goes off to the Sodexo company who actually run it for us. Shirt sales, a fair amount of the shirt sales goes to the government in VAT. A fair amount of the shirt sales goes to Adidas, who manufacture the shirt, and a fair amount of money goes to whomever sells the shirt, be it Celtic's own shops or other retailers. So, but if Celtic's revenues are going down and down, as they will do because of lack of Champions League prize money and lack of Champions League TV money, plus the external merchandise revenues are going down, plus the cost of Celtic to buy things in to run the club, that's going up and up with inflation. And then so the wage bill for Celtic is going to go up year by year by year for the next few years, with us signing the Jotas and the Tierneys and the upgrading of several of our better players' contracts as well. So revenue potentially will go down and down. Wages is going up and up. The cost of living, the cost of operating the club is going up and up with inflation. So it is a bit of a balancing act. And in the end, I'm not sure what the end game of I'm not sure what the end game of all the fan protests is, because I can't see any possibility of the board voluntarily going. For the board to be sacked, in essence, under the laws of companies, because company law, finance law, business law, etc., they need to be basically guilty of various different things which are crimes, or not running the club efficiently. So making profit and increasing revenue, or balancing out revenue and stuff, and what's more, delivering on the pitch. So on the pitch, we are winning doubles and trebles and leagues. Last season, we made good progress in the Champions League. That's obviously not going to be the case here this season. However, if we made good progress in the Europa League, at least we're maintaining a degree of European success. So certainly the board are not guilty of any kind of financial crimes. They're not guilty of not running the club efficiently in terms of it being a business. The stockholders, the shareholders, the investors are happy with the way that Celtic is going. Celtic's share price did drop a bit with all the not being in the Champions League and also all the going-ons behind the scene, but Celtic's share price has regained and gone up higher than it did before. So financial markets are thinking that Celtic are still a very well-run club. So if we did sack Michael Nicholson, Mackay, the finance officer, sacked Peter Lawwell, Dermot Desmond was forced out, all the other shareholders and board members were forced out, what happens? Who takes over the club? Somebody was talking about a membership scheme where all the Celtic members pay £5, although if you were short of money, you could get it for free, and that it would be one member, one vote. And so everybody who is a Celtic Football Club member pays £5 a month for £60 in a year. Some people get it for free, and everybody who's a member gets a one vote, which doesn't really strike me as being a very good way to run a multi-million-pound business or football club, where there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people all voting. You could never ever get consensus. You could never get leadership. You could never get a direction. So I'm not quite sure what the end game of all of this is. I don't think that I can't see it in any way the board gets sacked. I can't see in any way that the board gets forced out. I can't see in any way, other than the fact that the lives of Peter Lawwell, Michael Nicholson, Dermot Desmond, the other major shareholders become so miserable that or they feel that their life is actually in threat. What really, really upset me tremendously in two different ways was the graffiti at Celtic Park, which means that somebody on the ground staff, the maintenance crew, etc., is going to have to spend hours and hours and hours cleaning off the graffiti. But some of the graffiti was talking about shooting the board. And that really upset me. Remembering that several years ago, someone firebombed Peter Lawwell's car and house, which nearly killed his wife and some children who were in the house with her. She was in the house when the car was set on fire, which then set the house on fire. That to me is just awful. That somebody is threatening with killing the board members, and someone a few years ago did try and firebomb his car in his house. So that really upset me when I saw that on the Celtic news sites. Now, Coyote Mike was asking a few questions ago. I'm sorry, when I start talking about things, I'd often talk. So I do apologise if I miss comments. I am actually doing my best to try and keep up with this. I am just an enthusiastic amateur old man who's doing this for fun. I'm not as slick as the Rhine Woman 8s and the people who do Seltzer here, or a lot of the other ones, the ACS S1 people, the Celtic Bay people. They're all professionals. They all do. A lot of them do it for a living. A lot of them have been doing it for years and years and years. I'm just an old, retired, semi-retired, retired, enthusiastic fan. So I do apologise if I don't keep up with things. What I personally would have really liked to have seen was at the start of the season when Rodgers came back at the start of pre-season. Reportedly, he and Desmond and Lawwell and Nicholson had a few days at Rodgers' house in Spain playing golf and talking and stuff. Reportedly, there were talks about extending his contract, which Rodgers appears to have brushed aside. So I really would have liked at the start of this season in July, when they all come back from pre-season, for Rodgers to say, "This will be my last year at Celtic. I have plans to move into European football. I have plans to move into Europe, into international management. So I will be leaving Celtic at the end of 25-26, so in May, June of 26. That's very similar to what Jurgen Klopp did at Liverpool a couple of seasons ago, handing over to Arne Slot. And so Liverpool could plan and develop things and recruit people, etc. So that's what I would personally have liked to see. Or with Celtic having had all this kerfuffle and all the stresses on and off the pitch over the last 6 weeks or so, for Rodgers to say tomorrow at his press conference, "I have extended my contract at Celtic through to the season 27-28, and I would have gone, great, that's another couple of years of Aaron Rodgers, sorry, it's an American football thing, of Brendan Rodgers. I think in terms of Scottish football, Rodgers will deliver success. I think last season proved that he could deliver success at a European level. I think if Celtic's internal structures of recruiting and transfers and finances started to work far better, a bit like they did under Ange Postecoglou, when transfers often came in early, and things were ready to go on day one of the transfer window rather than being scrabbled about on the last day of the transfer window. Quite why there's been a change since Rodgers came in, I'm not very sure. But Ange tended to do good early transfer windows, added a few players here and there as the transfer window went on, balanced out players coming in, players going out. But he often had 3 or 4 players coming in right at the start of a window who were going to be part of the team and all bedded in. I don't think Brendan Rodgers is a truly elite manager. I think he is actually quite good at coming in and managing another manager's players. I think I said on the last live stream, Rodgers has never successfully got through season 4 at any club. Got sacked by Liverpool in season 4, sacked by Leicester in season 4. Obviously, at Celtic, he did 2 and a bit seasons and left to go to Leicester. He's now in season 3 at Celtic. He's never gone to be a successful season 4 manager. Often to be a season 4 manager, you have to be keeping on refreshing the squad, delivering you're delivering your training messages, your tactics, your formations in different ways. Otherwise, the players at the club get rather stale. And it certainly seems that Liverpool in season 4 and at Leicester in season 4, things got very, very stale for the players. The transfer windows at those two clubs were very poor as well, and got worse as things went on. And Rodgers actually is the only Liverpool manager who's done 3 seasons and won absolutely nothing. So I think in terms of Scottish football, Rodgers is a good manager for Celtic. I think he will deliver success domestically. I think he's got the potential to deliver things in Europe. But my worry is Brendan Rodgers taking the club further and further forward. The great managers, the Wengers, the Jock Steins, the Bill Shankly, Bob Paisleys at Liverpool, the Alex Fergusons at Man United were great ones in keeping a club moving on and on and on, being successful, but also replacing players, bringing in new players, changing the tactics, changing the message, keeping the club moving forward and forward and forward. Rodgers doesn't seem to be able to make his teams move forward for more than 3 years. So I'm happy for Rodgers to be the manager now. I would like for some certainty and finality to be known now, i.e. he's going to stay for another 2 or 3 years. Grand, we can work with that, or he's going to leave at the end of the season, and then Celtic can then start looking at the Chap McKenna at Ipswich. That's one people have put that forward. People have talked about bringing in a manager from Europe. There are several very good up-and-coming managers all over Europe. Managers who've got clubs through into later stages in European competitions. Coming to manage Celtic is obviously a very, very big, high-pressure club to manage. I think that also takes a certain sort of manager. And that was kind of what Adam Eder was alluding to when he was saying that he found being a Celtic player very difficult, found the pressure cooker and the goldfish bowl of Glasgow kind of being always under pressure, always under scrutiny, difficult to cope with. Joe Hart still does look like he could keep going at a good level. Certainly, when Joe Hart came in, he looked a bit when he very first came in under Ange Postecoglou. He did look, I thought, a wee bit shaky, but very quickly he looked like he got his match sharp on his back, and he was a super goalkeeper for Celtic as our goalkeeper. I personally am very happy with Kasper Schmeichel. I think he always has looked like he is that bit more bigger physique. His dad obviously had a really massive physique as well. I think Kasper Schmeichel is actually still a really, really good goalkeeper. I think he is should be our number one for this season. However, if Kasper Schmeichel's shoulder recurred, I think Viljami Sinisalo is actually a really good replacement for him. I wouldn't have really any doubts of having him as being our number one. He was another player that we bought for around about £1 million in the 23-24 season. So I think in the long term, a couple of those signings are going to turn into really good players for Celtic in the future. And Viljami Sinisalo is going to be, I think, a Celtic star of the future as a goalkeeper. Now, Paul McEwen does raise an interesting point. Jose Mourinho did talk about a year, 18 months ago, how he would absolutely love to come and manage Celtic or Rangers in Glasgow. He said he would really like the extra pressure, the expectation, the history of Celtic or Rangers. Certainly, obviously, getting Jose Mourinho to come in and manage your coming in to manage your club is expensive. Whether Jose Mourinho would ask for the same amount of money he has got from Chelsea, Man United, the big clubs in Italy, Fenerbahce, etc., I'm not sure. Obviously, dropping down to Fenerbahce might well have been a bit of a financial drop down for him. He might say, £3 million, that's great. I'll come and manage Celtic for 3 years at £3 million a year. I don't know. Whether he would demand 5, 10 million pounds or greater than that, I don't know. If Mourinho did come to Celtic, whether he would be a successful Celtic manager, I don't know. He isn't the most attacking manager in the world. He does tend to be a manager who's very good at keeping clubs moving on, developing players. So it would be interesting to see Jose Mourinho coming to Celtic. See, the thing with Levy was Levy left, from what I've read, I may be wrong, Levy left voluntarily. He decided to leave. Now Dermot Desmond might decide to leave. So so people like Lawwell, Nicholson, Mackay, the finance manager, Dermot Desmond, they might choose to leave Celtic, and certainly the pressure and the protests and the banners and so on, that might well get to them more than the finances. I personally think that a lot of these things, like boycotting the start and ends of matches, boycotting Europa League or European matches, boycotting cup matches, was silent protest, i.e. the fans are silent during the games. I think all those things hurt the players and hurt the team's performance. Things like deliberately not spending any money at the ground on merchandising, food and drink, etc. Perfectly within everyone's right to do that. However, that does drop the revenue of the club, which is already dropping because of not being in the Champions League, inflation, etc. So I'm not personally sure that those things will a lot of these financial things and boycotting the club and not buying tickets and not buying merchandise, I don't think that really hurts the board members very much at all, if at all. Money is tight for lots and lots of people all around the world, which is why it's very, very galling for me with the way the world is when clubs like Liverpool spend £450 million in a transfer window. Another point that someone was making, which I fully accept and agree with, is that fans are no fans are happy. So Liverpool fans weren't happy at Liverpool, even though they spent £450 million, because Liverpool didn't buy a new centre back, because centre backs, one of the positions that Liverpool are relatively weak at. They've got Virgil van Dijk, but then they've got Konate, they've got Gomez, they've got a couple of young players, but they actually are quite weak at that position. And a lot of people feel that they should have spent 30, 40, 50 million on various different centre backs who were on their transfer list to buy. So even if you spend 450 million, fans aren't happy, as is the case at Liverpool. Fans were moaning and groaning at Spurs and Chelsea and Man United and Newcastle and everywhere. No matter how much money people spend, fans still aren't happy, because that's entirely reasonable. You always want that one thing better for your club. So you get all these things in and you still want more, which is entirely the way that football fans should be. You always want your club to be that bit better. So the only real way I can see Nicholson and so on leaving. So Nicholson could be sacked. So Desmond and Lawwell, the non-executive board members, could decide to sack Michael Nicholson, could choose to sack Mackay, the finance manager, because those are executive directors that are employed by the club, so Celtic can sack them. So maybe Dermot Desmond, etc., the board clubs together, and they sack Nicholson, they sack Mackay, and they bring in a new chief executive officer. Lawwell's now a fairly large shareholder in the club, about £1 million worth of shares in the club. He's the chairman. Another wee interesting thing about Lawwell is that Lawwell is very, very high up in a European group of football clubs called the European Club Association. European Club Association are a group of 700 of the biggest clubs in Europe who've all come together to form a big, big negotiation bloc. And apparently the ECA, of which Lawwell was a major, major guiding force, were a big factor in UEFA changing the Champions League format, changing a lot of the rules on financial fair play and so on. So having someone like Lawwell, who is very highly thought of as part of the ECA, highly thought of as part of UEFA, is actually quite very useful for Celtic in terms of Celtic progressing and remaining a powerful club. Some people have talked about European Super League as being one way that Celtic actually could reach the levels that they probably deserve to be at. So European Super League would in essence be the Champions League, except the Champions League is the league that Celtic and Rangers and lots of clubs in England, lots of clubs in Italy, etc. would be part of. So we no longer would be playing domestic league football. We would be playing home and away against all the best teams in Europe, probably a two-tier, three-tier system, pan-European league. Apparently, TV companies all around Europe would love it. Apparently, sponsors all around Europe would love it. So there is a tremendous force in terms of finances for a European Champions League to be like the domestic league for all the big clubs in Europe. Theoretically, you could have promotion and relegation. So theoretically, your Hibs and Hearts and Aberdeens, by doing really well in Scotland, could get a chance of playoffs to get into the lower tiers of the European League. So it's one of the things that has been talked about in terms of a way for Celtic to reach the levels that they maybe deserve to. About 10, 15 years ago was all these moves for Celtic and Rangers to get melded into the English Premier League. Sky were very keen on it, but the English Premier League chairman and the English FA completely stopped that from happening. Again, that would have been a chance for Celtic and Rangers to get really high levels of TV money, really high levels of sponsorship, and moving into a highly prestigious league rather than a wee backwater, lower league, low prestige league, low money league like Celtic. So good welcome to Bonnie, who I think is from Australia. So nice that we're crossing to the other side of the world. It's so Daniel Levy certainly hung on at Spurs a long, long time. He was very, very unpopular, probably as unpopular as Celtic's board was Daniel Levy. To the best of my knowledge, he left voluntarily. He didn't get sacked. He just chose to leave because he maybe stopped enjoying it. Maybe he didn't like the constant pressure campaign against him. When Celtic are playing at their best under Brendan Rodgers, they actually play a good brand of football, I think. The problem is I'm not massively convinced that Brendan Rodgers likes playing more risky, high-tempo football. A lot of the comments you get from the players at halftime and ends of games, or at ends of games, and so on, or telling us what the Rodgers was talking about in the halftime team talks. Goodbye to Pope Leo XIV. Obviously, you've got more important things than my silly live stream to watch, which is fine. You've got more important things, so have a good night and have a good day tomorrow. So when Celtic are playing at their best, playing attacking football, the kind of football we played under Ange Postecoglou, Celtic are a really good team to watch. There's been too many spells where Celtic have gone negative, be that Rodgers, be that the players losing confidence, be it The players at some points are not playing the way that Rodgers wants them to play. He keeps on saying he wants high tempo football, he wants forward passing, he wants to keep on going forward, but quite often a lot of things the way he seems to set teams up and not change teams mid-game suggests that he wants to be patient and wants to play boring football. Yes, so oops. So Pat McLaughlin was saying he thinks Rodgers might take a year out of football. That's certainly he did take a bit of time out of football after being sacked by Leicester before he came to Celtic. May well have turned down a few jobs before Celtic came calling to him then. I can't remember exactly where I read it, but there was a whole series of stories maybe about a month ago were saying that Rodgers' current ambition is to manage either in Europe or manage an international team. And say the FIFA World Cup in 2026 obviously is a time where there will be almost certainly a lot of jobs at a high level of football, be it international or be it in British and European leagues cropping up. Tends to be quite a lot of turnover of managers. So will be interesting to see where Rodgers goes. I personally don't see Rodgers being Celtic manager in 2026 onwards. Does also make recruiting players in the January window in 2026 more difficult as well. If there's not a commitment from Rodgers that he's going to be at the club past the summer of 2026, I wouldn't personally want to move to a company which may mean moving country, moving your family, moving your kids' school, change of language, change of culture, change of healthcare, education system, etc. It's quite a commitment to move from European football, Japanese football, American leagues, etc., to come to Scotland, where you've got whole changes of culture, language, education systems, health systems, and stuff. So I would really want someone to be committed as the manager. So if we knew that Celtic's manager from summer 2026 was going to be whomever it's going to be, I think that would actually help with recruitment, and I think it would have helped with recruitment in the summer as well had there been more certainty about Celtic's long-term plan and who was going to be the manager in the long term. Well, Paul McCoon, you make a really good point. I think Celtic would have struggled against the absolute elite teams in the Champions League. We struggled quite majorly against Borussia Dortmund. However, by that token, we gave Bayern Munich a good game over 2 legs. We were within a few minutes of taking them to extra time and then potentially to penalties after that. So I think Celtic would have struggled. Come what may, Celtic would have struggled against the Real Madrids, the Liverpools, the Man Cities, the Arsenals, the PSGs, the top Italian teams. I think even if we'd added the most brilliant transfer window, we would have struggled to compete against the PSGs, etc., etc. You think about the players that Liverpool have brought in, that Man City have brought in, Arsenal, etc., they've brought in some of the best players in the world. PSG, Real Madrid keep on bringing in the best players in the world, way better than the players that Celtic or Scotland League could ever hope to get. So personally not heard of Martin Oriel as a sporting director. There are many different theories. Now, to the best of my memory, I don't think Brendan Rodgers worked terribly well with a sporting director either at Liverpool or at Leicester. It didn't seem to work out terribly well for Brendan Rodgers to have that other person who was sort of above him or beside him, etc. In theory, it's a good move to have somebody taking away some of the manager's role. It didn't seem to work from best of my memory, and again, my memory might well be wrong, didn't seem to work terribly well for Rodgers having a sporting director at Liverpool or at Leicester. From what the board statement was saying, all transfers into and out of Celtic go through Brendan Rodgers, i.e. he's the one who's greenlighting Shin Yamada, Hayata Inamura, Ross Doohan, etc., etc., etc. So it would appear that that Rodgers is saying yes to all these players coming in. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. Yep. I fully accept that that Brendan Rodgers might well be mates with this chap or Martin Oriel. However, Brendan Rodgers also is best mates with a couple of the coaches who came in to replace coaches who'd been here under under Ange Postecoglou. They left the club. A couple of coaches that are Brendan Rodgers' mates from years and years ago came into the coaching structure. The person, Paul Tidsdale, who's got this odd role at Celtic, someone that Brendan Rodgers knew from English football, someone that Rodgers had worked with a lot in English football. Not sure whether Tidsdale's role is really working for Celtic. And one of the head of recruitment, head of scouting, again, was somebody who was a Rodgers recommendation or Rodgers contact from years ago. So we certainly have brought, it would appear, in a couple of coaches who are Martin O'Neill. So Martin O'Neill coming in. So if we're talking about Martin O'Neill, the great Celtic manager of the early 2000s, that's an interesting one. Obviously, I don't know whether O'Neill would want to do that, but he seems quite happy being a football pundit. He seems quite happy being away from the public eye and away from pressure. Didn't work terribly well with Kenny Dalglish and John Barnes, with Dalglish as sort of the director of football and John Barnes is the manager. As I said, Brendan Rodgers didn't seem to work terribly well with sporting directors at Liverpool and Leicester who did use them. So, but interesting. If Martin O'Neill came back to the club, if Martin O'Neill came back to the club as in any role, I think that would be a very, very positive for Celtic. I think he was a manager who was very good on the pitch as a manager, very good off the pitch as a manager. I think he was a very, very good tactician. I think he was very, very skilled in terms of transfer market. He obviously had a great career at lower levels, establishing himself. He'd have been successful at smaller clubs, good ability to bring through younger players, good ability to scout players and bring young players into teams and bring players into teams who got better and better. So if Martin O'Neill came back to the club in one role or another, I think that would be a very, very good move. But I'm not convinced that. Yes, and Pat McLaughlin, Martin O'Neill, very, very good at handling the media, and I do not think that's Brendan Rodgers' best skill. We'll find out tomorrow at the press conference, or is it today? We'll find out at the press conference on Friday lunchtime quite how Martin O'Neill's going to handle the board, handle the press. I suspect that 90% of the questions are going to be about transfer market, the Celtic statement, the fan protests, and a tiny proportion of the questions are going to be about the actual Kilmarnock game, fitness issues, selection issues. Now, if I was Brendan Rodgers, and I kind of think this is the kind of thing that Martin O'Neill, Jock Stein, Gordon Strachan would have done, Ange Postecoglou would have done, had they been given questions about things that they didn't want to talk about. They just wouldn't talk about them. They would pivot onto the things they want to talk about. So they would kind of ignore the question and then give the information that's actually what the fans really want to know. The fans want to know, is Ralston fit? Is Kieran Tierney fit? How have Balakwisha, Iheanacho, Sarachi, Nigrin, Chinyeki, etc. How are they all settling into the club? How's Shin Yamada doing? How's Dyson Maida been, having had his move to wherever he was going to be going to, Germany, somewhere or other? How's he been? How's he been to, in terms of settling down after the disappointment of not getting to leave Celtic in the transfer window? How's, all these things to me are much more important than hearing Brendan Rodgers for the 47th time talking about transfer windows and conflicts with the board and this and that and the other. I would just be happier for Celtic, for everybody, just to get on with playing football and get on with supporting football and trying to get Celtic back to where we need to be in terms of Scottish football and European football. I think Celtic's ceiling as it is in terms of in European football, I think our ceiling is probably going to be last 16 of the Champions League, last 8 of the Europa League. I don't think that Celtic's got the finances from TV money and from the prestige of our league to really compete with getting the absolute best in Europe and around the world to come and play in our league for our club. If we're thinking about spending big money on the academy, player development, player recruitment, player scouting, I think that would be one way for the Celtic could actually start hitting above their pay grade, if you want to use that term, which is how Club Brugge, Union Saint-Gilles was, Bodo Glimt, a few of the other teams in Holland and Scandinavia have done, is Red Bull Salzburg, again, teams who've really committed to player recruitment, getting players in from smaller markets, getting in young players from all around the world and developing them internally. And I think that's certainly something that Celtic should be really spending a lot of money on. Yeah. Neil Lennon was a relatively successful manager at Celtic. I think he basically took on good teams inherited from other managers and kept them sort of ticking along at the level that they were. Neil Lennon hit a wall much like Brendan Rodgers did when he was managing Liverpool and Leicester, taking the club further down the line, starting to change players, change tactics, change the way they play, etc. was when Lennon really started to struggle. And certainly he's not been a success at any other club he's ever managed. Yes, Big Ange, when Big Ange Postecoglou came to Celtic, at the end of COVID, still a lot of restrictions in terms of players and fans and so on. I was very sceptical about Ange Postecoglou. He really was a manager I'd only heard a wee bit about through his big success as the manager of Australia internationally. It was the manager I thought, oh, that's a strange one. But by goodness, did Ange Postecoglou come into Celtic like a new broom, cleared out a whole load of players who were past their best, moved a couple of players, Christopher Ayer and Odsonne Edward on. Stories are that both Ayer and Edward in the second half of the preceding season were hardly trying for Celtic. They both wanted away from Celtic. I think Ange Postecoglou did a tremendous job of clearing out players, bringing in new players, working with the players that he had, adding a few more players to the squad, then really in the winter window, bringing in some super players in Hatate and Maeda, particularly. Earlier on, he brought in Kyogo, etc. So he made some brilliant signings, which really took Celtic forward. So he's a real breath of fresh air. Yeah. So yes, and I think that's one. And if there was one thing that I really wish the Celtic board and Michael Nicholson and Peter Lawwell, etc., would learn from, is that I think personally having a club spokesman or spokeswoman, club spokesperson, somebody who is out speaking for the club on a weekly basis, a twice weekly basis, etc., would be so good, because that person would be actually trained in public speaking, trained in public relations. Football managers are not very well trained in public relations, so quite often they get themselves into trouble, or get the club into trouble with what they say. So Brendan Rodgers quite often in his press conferences gets quite grumpy and defensive with people when people challenge his tactics or challenge his selections, rather than actually talking about things calmly, rationally. Tends to round on the journalist and kind of say, show us your medals. I've got all these cups and trophies and leagues. What have you ever won? So in essence, if you're the face of the club, you should be in some ways towing the party line and speaking for the club, and not necessarily just giving your own personal opinions. So I think Celtic should really invest in a proper public relations person. Ange Postecoglou was good for speaking for the club and for himself. Martin O'Neill, good for speaking for himself, good speaking for the club. Brendan Rodgers, I don't think speaks very well for the club, which is why there's been a lot of confusion, a lot of smoke screens and misdirection and confusion and different stories one day or the other. My personal, Kenneth Todd, perfectly reasonable opinion. I think Ange Postecoglou wanted to move on to a bigger league, to a bigger challenge. I think he maybe thought that the only step up in terms of Scottish football, having won a double then a treble, was to do the treble again, but then makes progress in Europe. I don't think lack of investment in Ange Postecoglou in the transfer window was why Ange left. I think he left because he wanted to move to a bigger league, a prestigious league. He wanted to move to a league that's got £1 billion TV contract, massive sponsorship deals coming into the club, as opposed to at Celtic. We've got a £40 million a year TV contract that for all the teams in Scotland. We've got, in terms of Scottish football, big sponsorship, but in terms of British football, European football, we've not got the finances. If you think about tiny clubs like Bournemouth, for example, Brentford, tiny stadiums, tiny fan bases, but they've got a massive, about £200 million a year in TV money every year coming into their coffers. Big money coming in through all the sponsorship and prize money in their league. So their finances are way bigger than Celtic's can be ever under the current circumstances. So I think Ange Postecoglou moved to the English League, Premier League, simply to manage a higher level of football in a league that had so much more money than Celtic could ever hope to do. And then I think in that case, Postecoglou thought, if I move to Spurs or whomever in England, I'll have a chance of making good progress in England and then having the success in Europe that I want to have as well. I think at Celtic, he had a bit of a brick wall, not so much from the board, not financing him, but simply because the money isn't there in Scottish football and prestige isn't there in Scottish football for getting big players to come in and play for us in our league. I think that was kind of evidenced by the fact that Kasper Dolberg wanted to go to Dutch football or German football. He wasn't wanting to go back to Scandinavian football. He wasn't wanting to go to Scottish football. He was happy in Belgian football. I think he thought Belgian football, Scottish football, Scandinavian football, this is not really a career move. Moving back to Holland, moving to Germany, moving to England, all those would be career moves for me. So I think he thought coming to Celtic wasn't a good forward move for him. And in terms of league finances and league prestige, I couldn't really disagree with him. Yes, I think, and again, Ange Postecoglou not really being a manager who stayed at clubs for terribly long either. He tends, a bit like Rodgers, to be there for a few years and then move on. I think he wanted to be at Spurs longer than a couple of seasons. But to be fair to him, he won the Europa League in his second season. They did come 17th out of 20 in the league. He did have the most horrendous problems with injuries at Spurs in his second season. And also in his first season, obviously, he didn't have Harry Kane, who moved on. Yes. Ange Postecoglou, one of my favourite all-time Celtic managers, on and off the pitch. He was a breath of fresh air. Yes. So Steve makes a brilliant point. Ange didn't tend to stay anywhere terribly long. He was a success in Australian football, moved on, Japanese football, came to us. 2 brilliant seasons for Celtic, couple of seasons for Spurs. I'm not massively convinced that he's going to do well for Nottingham Forest, simply because, not because of him, but because of interference from his chairman. And his chairman being very, very quick to sack people. Their previous manager, the one they sacked at the start of the week, Nuno Espirito Santo, he'd done a tremendous job at Nottingham Forest, and the reward for that was to get sacked. He got them a team that when he took over with them, he was a team that was very likely to get relegated, and yet he took them up the league. He kept them in the league. He then got them into the European position. At one point, they were challenging for Champions League football at Nottingham Forest. I thought he was very unlucky to lose his job. Ange Postecoglou got the job. In some ways, I half thought, wouldn't it be good if Brendan Rodgers took the Notts Forest job? Then Ange Postecoglou would come back to Celtic. If that could have been arranged as a nice swift thing, that would be brilliant. And obviously, Nottingham Forest sacked Espirito Santo in a couple of hours announced that Postecoglou was getting the job. So clearly, behind the scenes, they've been lining up Postecoglou for a week or two. So if we had something similar, that Rodgers leaves, but Celtic's already got somebody earmarked to come in, I think what Celtic couldn't really probably afford is a month or two of John Kennedy and Gavin Strachan and Stevie Woods and so on managing the club as caretaker managers. If Rodgers does leave between now and the end of the season, hopefully Celtic do have somebody already lined up. And if, again, the behind the scene insider people are to be believed, the board has had this feeling for several months that Brendan Rodgers isn't committing himself to Celtic in the long term. That might also explain in some ways the difficulties in the transfer window. Brendan Rodgers not looking in the longer term for Celtic players. I don't know. Maybe the board not trusting him because, again, he wasn't giving that long-term commitment to the club, to take the club forward. I think there's quite a lot of things going on behind the scenes that we'll never ever know. And I think there has been an awful lot of stuff behind the scenes at Celtic that has been very disruptive. And I think one of those has been Rodgers not committing to Celtic in the longer term. Yeah. So I do get your point, Pat. Spurs probably did have expectations and hopes beyond their actual level. They'd actually gone a long time since they'd actually really had done very much. So Postecoglou won them a trophy. It'd been several seasons since they'd actually won anything. And his reward for that was to get sacked. One of the last things that Daniel Levy did as Spurs chairman was to sack Postecoglou at the start of this season. I think Forest probably, I would have thought, yes, so their expectations probably aren't that high, but the reward for the manager who got them to Europa League, got them into the top half a dozen in the Premier League. And actually a pretty decent squad he's got there now as well. His reward was to get sacked. So maybe it's not so much lack of ambition. It's you do what the chairman says, and certainly he's kind of got himself in a bit of hot water, the chairman. Yes, so certainly Nottingham Forest had a lot of poor years before they kind of had their comeback under Stevie Cooper, and then come back under more recently Espirito Santo. So I think certainly Ange Postecoglou, if he's allowed to manage Nottingham Forest the way he wants to manage football clubs, I think he's going to be a success in Nottingham Forest. But whether he gets that free run, I'm not so sure. Yes. Stephen making a brilliant point. I think Rodgers coming back to Celtic in the summer of 23 was a wee bit like getting a very comfy pair of slippers. The board were comfortable with him. He was comfortable with the board. Some of the players that he'd left Celtic at the end of his first spell were still at Celtic. The McGregors, the Forrest, the Ralstons, etc. I think a lot of the staff were still the same staff at Celtic as it had been when he'd left the club. So I think it was quite convenient for Rodgers. I think Rodgers thought, this is a springboard to get me back to a bigger league, be it England, be it Europe, be it international, be it Saudi. I think those are all perfectly reasonable things for. Yes, Bonnie makes a brilliant point. I think Rodgers came back in a lot of ways for an easy life. I think he thought, I'll go back to Celtic, I'll win things, it'll get me back on the career ladder to go back to a higher league and a bigger league and a prestigious league. So I think it was if you want to use the phrase, a marriage of convenience. It suited Rodgers to have 2 or 3 years restoring his reputation after, in the end, a fairly poor spell at Leicester for a couple of seasons. And it gave Celtic a manager with quite a lot of kudos in terms of skill and success. Whether it was a long-term good move for Celtic, I'm not sure. Probably wasn't. It may have been at that point a good idea to bring in a young manager from elsewhere in Britain or elsewhere in Europe, a younger manager with new ideas, new ways of playing football, a bit like Ange Postecoglou, except a younger version of him, to take Celtic forward into the future. Maybe a manager who had a real skill at developing younger players and making them into first-team players, not a role that any of the Celtic managers have done very well recently. So possibly the Bodo Glimt manager, maybe the Red Bull Salzburg manager. There are plenty of managers with that reputation of managing successfully at first-team level, but also bringing through the new first-team players of the future. Oops. I don't know off the top of my head. I would have thought that £3 million is probably a pretty reasonable salary for a manager in England. I would have thought probably the more elite managers, like the Arne Slots, the Artetas, and so on, are going to be on considerably more than that. But I think probably quite a lot of the managers in the middle half and the lower half are going to be on the same sorts of money as Rodgers. Again, I don't think Rodgers probably would have necessarily come back to Celtic had his financial package not been of a reasonable level in comparison to what he was getting at Leicester, or would have got had he been manager of West Ham or Everton or Brighton or whomever. So I suspect that the £3 million a year he gets at Celtic, it certainly was the most that Celtic's ever paid a manager to be the manager. It was more than Ange Postecoglou was getting in the preceding couple of seasons. So my suspicion is that probably £3 million a year as a manager's salary would get you many of the jobs in the England Premier League, although probably not the top 6 or so in that league. That's another really good point that you're making there as well. That Mourinho hasn't actually had the biggest of success in recent years. He has tended to go to clubs and not stay terribly long, and then no doubt gets a pretty good financial severance package at the end of it. Again, with not quite sure what Ange Postecoglou's contract was at Spurs, but likely having been sacked by them, he would have got a pretty good financial package from them. But personally, I think Celtic need to start planning for the next manager now, because I don't think Rodgers is going to be here at the end of the season. And with the way that he treated Celtic the last time around, I wouldn't put it past him to leave Celtic mid-season either. I don't see Celtic ever paying 15 to 20 million pounds a year. I think probably 3-4 million, like we're paying Rodgers, is probably the ceiling as to what we would be willing to pay. And I think that kind of level of salary would attract more than the needed quality of manager to come to Celtic. I think Celtic's next manager needs to be somebody who is young, new ideas, and is good at developing players, but also good at developing young players to come through in the future years. So a wee bit of a longer term plan. I don't think Celtic have been terribly good at longer term plans for a long time. We've not actually produced our own players very much at all for years and years and years. So Jose Mourinho, certainly big success in the past, hasn't been a big success in recent years, and he's had quite a number of very high-profile jobs and been moved on, and financially must be happy, and he has been very well recompensed for those games. Certainly, that's one of my thoughts also about Celtic's next manager is, again, maybe also Celtic also doing a wee bit of long-term planning in terms of the manager. I think John Kennedy, Gavin Strachan, our current coaches and assistant managers and stuff, I don't think any of them are of managerial quality. And I think that is actually can be quite a useful thing, is developing the assistant managers up to a level where they can be the number one manager. Quite a number of current managers in England and around the world have actually been other people's assistant managers. Maresca and Arteta both being assistant managers to successful main managers, and then in time becoming successful managers themselves. I think that's actually something else that Celtic maybe should look at in terms of their next manager. Maybe bringing in a Scott Brown, maybe Callum McGregor retiring, becoming a player, assistant manager, player coach, etc. Maybe bringing back another ex-Celtic player, Robbie Keane, another person people have put forward as being a potential Celtic manager of the future. Yes, so certainly Mourinho was obviously a big success. He beat us in the UEFA Cup final one year, then he took the same Porto team on to be the European champions. I think I'm right in saying that's the last time a club from outside of the big 5 leagues has ever won the Champions League / European Cup, was Jose Mourinho, and that's now over 20 years since a team from a medium size league won the highest trophy in European football. And I think that's another reason why I think Celtic's hopes of challenging at the absolute highest level at the moment are low, because we're stuck in the Scottish League with low TV money, low sponsorship, low prestige, low ability to attract top level players. Yes, so Bonnie is making a brilliant point. I think bringing in a foreign manager is a good move in terms of moving the club forward, getting out of the rut of the Brendan Rodgers way of playing football, which is quite a British way of playing football. Ange Postecoglou had more of a continental style of playing football, and I think that took Celtic forward. I think Celtic's gone backwards in terms of quality of football, style of football on the pitch. So I think we've gone backwards in terms of the product on the pitch under Brendan Rodgers, and I think what we really should have done when Postecoglou left, for one reason or another, is try to keep on moving the club forward. And I think the club has, at best, gone stagnant and stale and stuck where it has been in terms of quality on the pitch. I think new coach, new ideas, new way of playing, new message to the players who are at the club, and I think that would reinvigorate the players. Very, very hopeful, however, that the Rodgers, Strachan, Kennedy, Rodgers' mates who are coaches at the club, that combination of them can move things forward. I'm hoping that the senior players, the McGregors, the Carter Vickers, the Tierneys, the Schmeichels, are going to be able to get the other players back on the right page, get them moving forward, get them inspired. I think a couple of years ago, when Celtic were having a bit of a doldrums in Rodgers' first season, players like McGregor, Johnston, Taylor and Hart apparently led the players in negotiations and talks with Rodgers, and Celtic certainly seemed to pick up in terms of their form after those couple of defeats to Kilmarnock and Hearts at the end of Rodgers' first year, or the end of 23. We had a series of rather poor results, apparently clear the air meetings with the players and Rodgers, and players like Hart and Taylor and McGregor and Johnson leading the way on and off the pitch as well. So yes, certainly one of the things I do look at when I'm looking at the post-match reports of Celtic matches is look at the stats, things like possession, shots on goal, corners, touches in the box. But one of the main things where Celtic have really, really struggled under Brendan Rodgers, especially this season, is the number of passes that are backwards or sideways and not forwards. We've really, really struggled for one reason or another getting the ball forward in any way. Our long passes are poor. Our forward passes numbers are poor. Our passes in the opposition half and in the final third of the pitch are also poor. Our crossing accuracy isn't good. Our chance creation this season hasn't been good. So there's a lot of these stats where, despite the fact that we've got 60-70% of the possession, we're not getting quality shots on goal. We're not creating quality chances. And so it's not, for me, any coincidence our top scorer this season is Benjamin Negrin, scoring goals from a sort of attacking midfielder role. And quite a few of Negrin's actually a couple of Negrin's goals in that time, actually even all three, have actually been more of him playing as a striker role of getting into the box and supporting the main striker. Something that Matt O'Reilly did pretty well. Under Ange Postecoglou, particularly our wide players, Maeda, Abada, Jota, etc., were the players coming in to support Giamakis and Kyogo. So we were getting goals from lots of different players and lots of different sections of the team. And last season, we did get goals from all over the team. McGregor got 10 plus. We had 3 forward players all getting 20 plus. So this season, we've struggled in chance creation. We've struggled in forward passes. And the number of times I'm at home watching the game on television, I'm shouting at Scales and Carter Vickers and Ralston to get the ball forward, or shouting at McGregor in particular to actually be facing the opposition goal, not facing Kasper Schmeichel when he takes a pass. If he takes it on the half turn, takes it facing forward, the whole pitch is opening up for him. But too often, he's receiving a short pass from a centre-back or a full-back or from Schmeichel, and he's not got very much to do because Celtic's also not making runs. And under Ange Postecoglou, we certainly made lots and lots of runs. We took quick free kicks, quick throws, quick corners, quick restarts, quick by kicks. And it's something we did do quite well last season, but this season we've kind of gone back to boring, tippy-tappy, Rodgers ball, not Ange ball. So it's kind of like we've gone back to square one with Rodgers this season. So we're back how we were at the start of the 23-24 season. So for me, Celtic's football has regressed from this season. It's regressed back to Rodgers' first season. Yep. Pat's making a brilliant point. I think it has been quite a contrast, and the number of press conferences that when Rodgers did come in, where he promised that he was going to use all the tactics and great points of Ange Postecoglou's way of playing football. He was looking to maybe tighten up defence, be a bit more careful with the ball. But he was very much wanting Celtic to be on the front foot and attacking, etc. And it doesn't seem to have really worked out for Rodgers to carry on Ange Postecoglou's way. Having been, well, as well as being a Celtic fan, I'm a Liverpool fan as well. And it was very frustrating with Brendan Rodgers being the Liverpool manager, because his negativity of managing the club, I'm pretty convinced, cost Liverpool the title, blowing a good lead going into the last 4 or 5 games of the season. It was Rodgers' negativity that cost Liverpool that title in the last few weeks, and him playing it safe. I think in football you do have to take risks from time to time. Ange Postecoglou's way of playing football was pretty high risk. I think probably the best way of playing football is a bit of both. Great point, Bonnie. Kasper Schmeichel is actually a pretty good, as was Joe Hart, but pretty good with the ball at his feet. He is often very good at getting the ball out of defence, starting quick by kicks, quick throwouts, etc. He often is actually good at getting Celtic going on the front foot, but too often he takes a quick by kick, a quick throwout, goes to Carter Vickers, Scales, Ralston, to a lesser extent Kieran Tierney, goes to Callum McGregor, and too often it's going back to another defender, it's going back to Kasper Schmeichel. It really should be going out to a fullback who gets it forward to a wide player, or a midfielder who then gets it forward to a wide player, or they're then putting balls through the defence for Maeda or Yamada or Kenny or Balakwisha or Tanyeki or Yang or Forrest to run onto, or hopefully Iheanacho once he fully gets into the side. It should really be about quick movements. And I think I said on the last live stream, one of my absolute favourite goals of all time, of 53 years of being a Celtic supporter, was the goal that Jota scored against Rangers. It was a quick free kick in our half, quick ball forward to Riley. It was beautiful long ball inside the Rangers fullback. Tremendous run by Jota. Great control, takes it wide, chips it over the goalkeeper. Absolute brilliant goal. good point. I think actually Carter Vickers does seem to be a player that has, to an extent, become a bit more careful with his passing. He was a player who had more skills at getting the ball forward. He was a player under Ange Postecoglou who was able to get the ball forward nice and quickly. So it seems to me that the scales and the Carter Vickers and the Ralstons have gone a bit negative since Rodgers came back to the club. But certainly, Carter Vickers these days doesn't seem to get the ball forward. 90% of Carter Vickers' passes these days seems to be to McGregor, Schmeichel, or Scales. And also, what tends to happen is we never seem to really spread the ball quickly from right to left. So there are times where a couple of lateral passes to get the ball from wide right to wide left quickly, then getting it forward, creating a bit of space, can be a very good tactic. It just seems that we go slow pass from Ralston, with Johnson being out injured, to Carter Vickers. He takes a couple of steps to control it, passes to Scales. He takes 3-4 touches to get it under control, to work out his next pass, gets it out to Tierney or whomever. And it's all so slow and pedantic. Never knew that Postecoglou had been in line for the Rangers job. I think it's a blessing for Celtic that he came to Celtic, not going to Rangers. I think he would have been a success wherever he goes as manager. Yes, Celtic have too many touches. There can be times where having lots of touches can be useful, but it's got to be quickly from player A to player B to player C to player D, creating a space, lots of players making good runs, so that there are 3 or 4 different options for that player to get a pass. The Celtic has an awful lot of wasted touches. And certainly we do pass the ball back to Kasper Schmeichel, I think, far too much. Yes, it's quite the thing about also with Kasper Schmeichel is, and it's not, I don't think it's actually Kasper Schmeichel's fault, is too often they pass the ball back to Kasper Schmeichel actually on his goals. Nearly cost us a goal against Kierat Almaty when McGregor did quite a firm pass back to Kasper Schmeichel right in the middle of the goals. That's the one where Schmeichel ended up having to handle the ball to stop a goal, gave away an indirect free kick in our 6-yard box. Luckily managed to clear that. We obviously gave away an own goal last season in the Champions League. Massive mix-ups of where Kasper Schmeichel was. The pass back from Carter Vickers was on the goal, although Schmeichel wasn't actually in the goal at the time. Celtic do need to, if that's the way they're going to set things up, they do need to get much more disciplined at finding Kasper Schmeichel in space, giving him time to make the pass. He actually is a good player, I think, at getting the ball forward quickly, much like Joe Hart was, much like Craig Gordon later on in his career was good at doing as well. But Kasper Schmeichel sometimes does take that extra step in terms of his passes. That sometimes does actually give Celtic a bit of an advantage, because he does that last minute pass. Often that creates a bit of space and a bit of an opening, although it can be quite scary. But certainly, passing back to Kasper Schmeichel should be the last thought and not the first thought. And under Ange Postecoglou, it tended to be the goalkeeper was the first person to get the ball, and he didn't get the ball again in that move. So that kept on going forward and forward and forward. And there were plenty of times in the Kierat Almaty 2 games and the Rangers game where Celtic were getting the ball in the opposition half, but ending up going backwards and backwards and backwards all the way back to the goalkeeper. And that's majorly frustrating. again, I'm not convinced that many of the Rangers players at that time would have actually accommodated Ange Postecoglou ball. Certainly, Morelos, I don't think was a player who would have tried that hard to Kyogo. Massive effort. A lot of the players that Ange Postecoglou had in the front line, the Abadas, the Jotas, Maeda, Kyogo, etc., all tried very, very hard. And I was chatting with somebody earlier on today about Dyson Maeda. As I said earlier on in the live stream, apparently today or tomorrow, depending on when Maeda got back from Japan duty in America, apparently Rodgers and Maeda were having a discussion about the way ahead and how Maeda is going to fit into the team for the next, well, some people think 4 months, some people think he'll be in the team, and that's what Celtic are certainly saying at the moment, is that Maeda is going to be in the team not just till January, but from January all the way through to the end of May. Apparently, that Rodgers and Maeda are having a chat over the next day or two about the way ahead. I think Maeda, whether he's staying for 3 or 4 months or 9 months or whatever, he's going to try his absolute hardest. I don't think he's going to drop his commitment to Celtic, his energy for Celtic. He's not scored the goals for Celtic so far this season, apart from once. However, I think his effort's been there. Just his chance completion, his chance creation hasn't been anywhere near the standards of last season, where he was Celtic's best player and one of the best players in Europe last season. Certainly, Morelos scoring goals for Celtic. I'm not sure his discipline would have worked at Celtic. He was a very ill-disciplined player that got himself booked and sent off far too much, which was good for Celtic that he got himself booked and sent off so often, but not good for the team that he actually was playing for. His chance conversion rate was really pretty good. I think he would have scored a ton of goals for Celtic, and it's not massively sure that his level of ill-discipline would have worked well at Celtic. I don't think Ange Postecoglou would have liked a player who got himself booked and sent off so often. And certainly that was one of the theories regarding why Giakoumakis and Postecoglou didn't always see eye to eye. Giakoumakis wasn't, from my memory of his season and a bit at Celtic, he wasn't the best player at closing people down. He was a good player at scoring goals. He was a good player at leading the line, but he wasn't the best player for playing the high pressure way that Maeda, Kyogo, etc. do. But I think pretty much anybody in a Celtic team that's functioning well will score goals, which is why I'm very hopeful that Kelechi Iheanacho will score a lot of goals for Celtic. That's why I think if Johnny Kenny, Shin Yamada were given a chance to be the Celtic centre forward this season, I think they also would score a lot of goals. I think Yamada, Kenny, Iheanacho, Maeda, when they're in form, are all good finishers. But what this season has proven is the lack of chance creation from wide and through the middle. We've just not been creating chances. We've not been putting teams under enough pressure, and which is why we've had 3 goalless draws in Europe and then against Rangers. Eric Cantona was certainly an enigma, a very, very, very talented player. I think a very, very difficult player to handle, which is kind of why he was at a lot of different clubs before he came to Man United. I think obviously Alex Ferguson was an extremely good manager as a manager. He did an amazing job at Aberdeen to make them into European Cup Winners' Cup champions, won cups and leagues in Scotland. Bit of a stormy time going down to England to start with Man United, but then when he brought through the Giggs and the Butts and the Scholes and the Neville brothers and so on, and then added on top-level transfers, then he added on Eric Cantona. He was pretty much the only manager in Cantona's life who ever actually got Cantona playing with discipline and playing for the team. He became a massive player for Man United. So I think it takes a certain level of manager to be able to manage players like Cantona. And I think Morelos was a player like that. And I do think Ange Postecoglou would have done a fine job managing Morelos, and I don't think he would have tolerated Morelos getting booked and sent off as much as he did. Yes. I think Cantona was very much worth the hassle. Number of managers hadn't really worked out a way to manage Cantona. He'd been at Leeds before he went to Man United, and their manager, who I think at that time was Howard Wilkinson, got incredibly frustrated with how good a player that Cantona was, but he wouldn't do what he was told. He wouldn't play for the team. He wouldn't play Wilkinson's tactics. Admittedly, Wilkinson, a very negative manager. And obviously at Man United, Ferguson let Cantona play much more. Let Cantona play much more like Cantona wanted to play. So in essence, he fitted the team to an extent around Cantona, which again is something that Brendan Rodgers has been absolutely awful at doing, is accommodating players into the way adapting the way he plays to fit players into the systems. In essence, players have to fit Rodgers' system or get changed to fit Rodgers' system, rather than Rodgers saying, these are our best 11 players. What's the best formation? What's the best tactics? What's the best tactics for beating this team or that team? So what are we going to do to Kierat Almaty that's different, that's going in the second leg especially, that's going to counteract what Kierat Almaty did us in the first leg and what Kierat Almaty did to Slovan Bratislava in the 2 legs before that, and have done successfully in European football in prior years as well. We did nothing to combat Kierat Almaty. We didn't change the players. We don't fit the player. We don't change the team to fit the players as well. Everything is regimented. Rodgers standard 4-3-3. We don't vary things enough. I can't remember who I was talking about with about this. It may be somebody who's been making comments and stuff this evening. But in essence, they were hoping that the little bit of magic that Sebastian Giniecki seems to have had playing for Hammarby in Sweden, his ability to take on a man, beat a man, do something a bit clever and a bit tricky and a bit risky, is one of the reasons that he was a success at Hammarby. It's one of the reasons that he really made a massive upgrade in terms of his profile last season in Swedish football. He was only at Hammarby for one season, basically. He'd been a wee bit of a journeyman player, never quite reaching his potential, but he very much reached his potential last season with last season with Hammarby. And he plays with a bit of skill, panache. Some people were saying when they watched my video about him, showing some of his season highlights, that he reminded them quite a bit of Jota, and that Jota also is a player that quite often tries to take on a player, try and beat them for trickery, dribbling, tries to beat them for pace, goes inside, goes outside. And it's certainly something that Giniecki has. And somebody was kind of saying they hope that Rodgers doesn't coach that bit of magic and that sort of impishness and risk-taking behaviour on the pitch that Giniecki seems to have out of him. And somebody was also kind of suggesting that was one of the reasons that Luis Palmas started off well at Celtic, and then the more he was playing the Rodgers system of playing football, he seemed to get slower and slower. never tried to beat a man, never tried to make a good, a very ambitious pass or cross. Some people feel that it was Rodgers' training methods and Rodgers' tactics that took away a bit of Luis Palma's creativity. And certainly from what I've heard about Luis Palma going back to Lech Poznan, apparently he's now playing a more of an attacking midfielder role, a more central role, and he seems to be succeeding in a different role at Lech Poznan than the one he played for Celtic. And my personal feeling is that Luis Palma was a player with a lot of skills. He maybe just didn't fit the Brendan Rodgers system of how he wanted his wingers to play. Rodgers likes his wingers like Maeda, Forrest, Yang, tracking back and defending and helping out in midfield, which is why I was a wee bit surprised when Celtic signed Jota, in that Jota isn't the best one for tracking back to defend. Jota does all his real dangerous work is in the final third, or dropping back into midfield to make a killer pass or a killer cross. And hopefully Jota's back, fighting fit in January. He apparently was at the Portugal-Scotland under-21 match, which was in Motherwell. Apparently he and Paulo Bernardo went to watch the under-21 international. So that's hopefully a sign that Jota's fitness is getting back towards getting close to restarting training. Yep. Yes. Excellent point, Stephen. He does need to, for me, adopt an attacking mindset. He also needs to adopt and adapt different ways and different solutions. Several people have said on live streams and in comment sections and replies that Celtic don't seem to have a plan B, C, or D. We've got a plan A, and if plan A is not working, we just keep on battling away with plan A. That was massively apparent from the Kira Almaty games. We had one plan for both games. We never changed anything during the game. We never changed anything between the games. We didn't do anything to counteract their tactics, their negative way of playing. We didn't go for long passes. We didn't play two up front. We didn't try and pack midfield and use wing backs. We did absolutely nothing at all. Yes, again, I would have absolutely no problem if Celtic came out on Sunday and they played a 3-5-2 with Carter Vickers and Tierney, maybe Scales, maybe Simpson Puzzi. Simpson Puzzi looked really, really good for Man City at the under-21 level. He coped well at international level with England. He is a player who can pass a ball. So is Dane Murray. I think we have got the players in our team to go 3-5-2. Good argument to say that playing Tierney as a left-sided centre-back would take some of the running around, the major running around that Tierney does as a left-back out of his game. He's kind of proven when he's played that left centre-back role for Scotland with Andy Robertson outside him that he is a player actually can overlap and get into the final third as well. So if you've got two defenders who are happy to hang back, it could allow Kieran Tierney to be that extra player moving into midfield or extra player even moving into the final third. I think the possibilities are endless. We've got a lot of very adaptable players. I think as soon as Alistair Johnston comes back, again, we could the roles that Alistair Johnston's played in Canadian soccer, Major League Soccer, international soccer. He's played a lot of different ways for Canada and for his Major League Soccer teams. He's played as a centre-back. He's played as a right-back. He's played as a midfielder. He's played as a right-sided midfielder. He's played as a defensive midfielder. Johnson's a very, very adaptable player. Kieran Tierney's a very adaptable player. I think a player like Simpson Puzzi could be a very adaptable player as well. Liam Scales, less skillful player, but a player who has played a variety of different roles. He played a bit of left back, played left centre back, played a wee bit of left midfield for Aberdeen when he was there on loan. So I think we have got players who can adapt to different systems. It's a question of letting them play different systems and fluidly going from one system to another system to another system. Yes, I, as things stand, I can't honestly see the point of having Simpson Puzzi at the club. In that he's been at the club, I would have thought, 6 weeks or so. And he's been on the subs bench a couple of times. He's not seen any first team action. He's not seen any time coming off the bench. He doesn't appear to have been injured. Just Rodgers was concerned about his match fitness, having had a longer pre-season. So I personally can't see the point of him being at Celtic. And if Celtic were just to say, we're going to return you to Man City tomorrow, I wouldn't be that fussed about it, because I do think in Scales and Murray and Trusty, who should be back from his foot problem quite soon, we have got backup centre-backs to go alongside Carter Vickers. And we don't seem to be using Puzzi in any way, so we'll find out with that one. Oops. I've read different stories about whether Greg Taylor was ever amenable to staying at Celtic, having found that Kieran Tierney was coming back to Celtic in the January transfer window. My understanding was there were quite a lot of promising, fruitful negotiations between Celtic, him and his agent leading into the Christmas New Year spell. And when Rodgers kind of, in essence, organised Kieran Tierney to come back to the club this summer, which he arranged in the January window, although the signing wasn't until the following summer window, that seemed to completely kill the Taylor negotiations, in that he didn't want to be at the club backing up Kieran Tierney. He wanted to be the number one left back at the club. So it did seem, from what I've read, that's what kind of killed negotiations, and Taylor wanted to get away and be the number one left back no matter where it was. So possibly putting Kit Taylor into the top 5 earners at Celtic, maybe that would have convinced them that being Kieran Tierney's left back backup was a good option. As things turned out, I suspect that Greg Taylor, or whomever's going to back up Kieran Tierney this season, is going to get a good number of games, be it whether Tierney gets injured, which is always a likelihood, or whether Celtic just are very careful with managing Tierney's game time, of never playing him twice in the same week, for example. So I think whoever was going to be back up to Tierney was always going to get a lot of games. Just it doesn't appear that Rodgers and the negotiation people convinced Taylor that that was going to be enough. So I think as soon as Tierney was announced as coming back to the club, I don't think Taylor was ever going to stay, but we'll never know. Yes, my feeling is that probably Brendan Rodgers gave him lots and lots of promises about how he was going to develop Simpson Puzzi's career. I don't think Man City would have allowed him to come to Celtic had there not been this understanding that Simpson Puzzi's career was going to be moved up and up, that Simpson Puzzi would be getting played in European football. And of course, that's not going to happen either, because he's not in our Europa League squad. Part of that is to do, again, with what I was talking about earlier on, our difficulties accommodating the homegrown players' quotas and the Celtic developed player quotas, in that we're always struggling with meeting those quotas the last 10 years or so in all the European competitions. So players like Shin Yamada and Simpson Puzzi were kind of sacrificed because of the need for meeting that 4+4 quota. So I'm from what I've seen from Simpson Puzzi on his highlight reels and from the friendly that he played for Man City against Celtic the previous season in America on our American tour, he looks a really good player, a good defender, good creative player, good passer, strong in the tackle, lots of speed, good intelligence. So he looks like a really good player. It's just really surprised me that Rodgers hasn't given them any game time at all. Yes, I think playing maybe Shin Yamada, Johnny Kenny, Simpson Puzzi, Dane Murray against Partick Thistle the week after next, the weekend after this one is a really great idea. Maybe giving Hayato Inamura the game at left back. Maybe again a team of 5 or 6 first choice players, 5 or 6 backups with 3 or 4 backups and 3 or 4 first choice players on the bench. I think it's a brilliant idea. Personally, I think Hayato Inamura is going to do better staying at Celtic than he would be going away on loan. I think the contrast for that is I think Callum Osmond and Johnny Kenny probably would do better leaving Celtic on loan for half a season or a season than coming back a more rounded player. But for one reason or another, Kenny, Yamada, Inamura, Osmond, all are still at the club and didn't get loaned out in the summer window. So Kilmarnock's on Sunday, and then we've got, I think it's Partick Thistle in the League Cup, which is going to be live on TV, and I think after that our next game's against Hibs, and I think the game against Hibs is our first home game. So I think we've got a away game against Kilmarnock, following weekend an away game at Partick Thistle, which is live on Premier Sports or whatever they're called these days. And then the following weekend it's the Hibs match, and that's a home match. So the first home match is in 3 weeks' time, and we'll see whether the planned protests and boycotts of parts of games, etc., we'll see whether that's put into place for that game. I suspect that a coordinated boycott of 10-12 minutes here, there, and 10-12 minutes there, and silent protest during the games, and etc. It'd be easier to coordinate that at Celtic Park than it is away games at Kilmarnock and Partick Thistle. But we'll see what happens. Hopefully everything cools down, everything moves on, and everybody, fans, board, players, coaches, support staff all get on the right page and start supporting Celtic going forward. I think also this one of the things that I put forward in a video and some comments in the past, other people disagree with me. I think Celtic are just very disorganised and chaotic. And that was really shown with the transfer window. I think there's an awful lot of moving parts within the Celtic club, and I don't think communication is very good. I don't think the interaction and working together of all the departments is very good. And I think a lot of these things need someone to pull them together. That's supposed to be people like the Chief Finance Officer Mackay, Michael Nicholson, similar heads of department are supposed to be bringing everyone together, and that's not really happening. I think also the club manager, so Brendan Rodgers in our case, also has to be a person who brings all the various different parts of the team together. So he really should be the one who's bringing through interacting with the academy, the recruitment people, the scouting people, the coaches, the players, the young players, the players out on loan. Rodgers should actually have a much more sort of umbrella type thing overseeing everybody. I'm not sure that he quite has that role of kind of overseeing everything. I think he concentrates an awful lot on the first team squad, doesn't really concentrate terribly much on the academy and the developing players. And I think that might be the bit of the disconnect. I think Ange Postecoglou had a more overarching role, coordinating all the other departments, coordinating with the board and the finance people, but also coordinating well with the recruitment and the scouting people to get targets in nice and early. And that doesn't seem to have happened under Rodgers. But I think we're disorganised, and I think having an actual spokesperson speaking for the club, as a kind of a middle person between the board and the players and the manager. I think having Rodgers speaking for us, speaking for the clubs too, is counterproductive. Yes, I think personally that Celtic are a very, very well financially managed club in terms of maintaining a very successful club, a rich club, a club with finances, a club with potential clout to reward players to stay at the club. I think Celtic struggle because we're in Scotland with the TV money and the prestige of our league to attract the top quality players that we want. We used to be much more of a stepping stone league for players. That seems to have diminished a bit in the last year or so. Fewer people like Arne Engels who are coming to us to develop and be in the shop window and then move on after 2 or 3 years. So I think there has been a diminishing in that side of things. But I think Celtic are, in terms of the way that the finance people, the board, etc., manage the club financially and as a business, I think it is really well managed. But transmitting that into a good football club with all the working parts all working together like a well-oiled machine, the last 2 or 3 years since Rodgers came back, that has not been the case. I think under Ange Postecoglou, after the first couple of months of teething problems, which were COVID-related, and also the fact that there had been quite a lot of stagnation under Lennon in the last season or so of Lennon's tenure as manager, I think Postecoglou got all the bits of the team of the club much better managed. That seems to have regressed under Rodgers. Be it Rodgers' fault, be it other people's fault, it just seems to have kind of fallen apart. Yes, I think he's a player. I think he's a man with a big ego. I think he's a man who doesn't take criticism very, very well. I don't think he likes journalists, reporters standing up to him and contradicting what he says. I think he's a player. I think he's a person who has quite, as I say, a big ego, and I think he actually thinks he's bigger and better and more successful than he actually is. I think he is a manager who probably Celtic, Leicester is his kind of level. I don't think he's a manager who could move to the really high levels. I don't think he's an Arne Slot, an Arsene Wenger, Jurgen Klopp, whomever you want to choose. I don't think he is that. I don't think he's that step up as a manager. Yes, as I said, if I was the board, if I was the board, and I said to myself, well, last summer and last winter, Mr. Rodgers, we gave you £39.3 million. Where are the players that we spent £39.3 million on? Well, if you're going to answer that question now, Arne Engels is on the bench, Paulo Bernardo's on the bench, Luke McCown's on the bench, for Yami Sinasal's on the bench, Adam Ida is out. He's gone to play for Swansea. Austin Trusty, admittedly, is injured at the moment, but if he was fit, he'd be on the bench. Kasper Schmeichel was brought in that window for free in terms of transfers. He is the one player of those that transfer class who's actually turned into a first-team regular, first-choice player. We've got Engels is a backup at the moment. McCown's a backup. Paolo Bernardo's a backup. Viliami Sinisalo's a backup. Austin Trusty's a backup. We didn't actually sign anybody last summer that, apart from Schmeichel, who was free, who's actually turned into a first-team regular 12 months later. One of those players has already left the club. In the winter window, we got in Jota. Now, would Jota be starting for Celtic at the moment? Probably would be. He probably would be starting on the right or the left with Maeda on the other side, or Maeda playing through the middle. But Jota, unfortunately, is injured. So probably signing Jota in that transfer window, January 2025, that would have turned into a first-team regular. He didn't really get into Celtic's first team terribly much in the spell between January and May, but then he was coming off hardly playing any football in Saudi or in Rennes in France. So probably if we're looking at this transfer windows from 24-25, the two windows, Schmeichel, first team starter. Jota probably now would be the first team starter on one of the wide roles. So it's not a terribly good outcome. It's not a terribly good success rate for all that money we spent last summer and last winter, turning into first team regulars. So if I was the board, I would be going to say, well, our transfer policy is not working. The players that you're greenlighting us to bring into the club, we spent 11 million on Engels, 9 on Ida, 6 on Trusty, about 3-4 million on Paolo Bernardo. That's not given us any first team players. The first team players we got for free with Kasper Schmeichel. Paul Tidsdale certainly came with a great reputation from English football. I think, had only actually managed as such a much lower level, like Exeter or something. So not a terribly impressive CV from before, but he came with a tremendously good reputation of being a tremendous football analyst, a tremendous talent spotter, a tremendous person to head recruitment and scouting and stuff. He was supposed to also have a role to help bring through players from the academy and the B team into the first team. That doesn't seem to really transpired. I'm not massively convinced what Paul Tisdale is doing at the club. He seems to have a sort of role floating between lots of different departments. Not massively sure what Paul Tisdale does. Yeah, I think personally it would be quite good if Celtic actually did once every couple of months or so did put the Paul Tisdales and the head of recruitment and the head of scouting up for press conferences. Quite why we have to have Brendan Rodgers every single time, I don't know. We could alternate Brendan Rodgers and one of the other coaches, one of the other manager or department heads every now and again. Certainly looking at American sport, which I also follow as well, quite often the head coach tends to give one press conference a week, but also the assistant coaches, the general manager, people within their scouting department, they often come and do a press conference as well. And I think that also would help Celtic fans understand what's going on behind the scenes at Celtic far better. I think that was something that the club statement was trying to point out, was that signing a player has lots of moving parts. It can be very, very difficult. There's the identifying players, scouting the players, recruiting the players, making sure the player wants to come, making sure that the fee that's being asked for them is within the right valuations, then making sure the player wants to come, and then if they are happy to come, what their wages are going to be, what their contract's going to be. So I think there's an awful lot of behind the scenes work, which Celtic aren't doing terribly well. And I think there's lots of moving parts, and I think it'd be better for accountability if some of those people, like the Paul Tisdales, the head of recruitment, the head of scouting, maybe the chief, the sort of the head of the medical staff, the physio staff, maybe if they came on every now and again to give us an update on how Jota's doing, how Alison Johnson's doing, what the time scale is for Austin Trusty's plantar fasciitis foot problem, it would be so much better. Instead, we get half stories and half truths and confusing stuff from Rodgers, which seems often to make things more confusing as to when players are going to be fit or what's going on behind the scenes. I think Rodgers actually knew a lot more about what was going on behind the scenes than he was owning up to in press conferences. I'm not. I think bringing in Martin O'Neill as a sort of overarching role as a director of football, I think that could be a really good move, as long as the person who's underneath him or working alongside him is happy to have that director of football. As I said, Rodgers didn't seem to cope very well with that at Leicester or at Liverpool. I think Nicholson's job is a lot more involved and complicated than what Martin O'Neill would do as director of football. I think there's an awful lot of rules and regulations regarding law, business law, employment law, confidentiality, stock exchange laws, etc. One of the things that they said in their statement was the fact that you're supposed to really talk about player recruitment and stuff behind the scenes and not in public, and that sharing transfer dealings and negotiations and deals in public before the deal's actually gone through is counterproductive. But it's also against quite a lot of business laws to talk about deals before they're done or speculation of deals before they're done, because it's all part of what would be called insider trading, which is against stock exchange and business laws and other employment laws and stuff as well. So I think there are an awful lot of things that are really complex in modern day football. So it does need someone with a good legal brain and business brain, like a Nicholson. I'm not saying he's the one necessarily for the job. Lowell had that sort of role before. Again, a person who came from a long history of very, very successful human resources and management and finances and stuff in previous companies and stuff. So, but I would not be, if Martin O'Neill was to come to the club in some kind of role as a director of football or some kind of role, I would be all for him coming. It would need to be with the approval of the existing manager, or the two of them coming in as a package. As I said a wee bit earlier on, didn't work very well when Kenny Dalglish had that sort of role with John Barnes underneath him. It was one of the rather poor spells in Celtic's history. We did bring in a couple of good players under those two, but it was a very poor success rate under Barnes and Dalglish as a twosome. Although not convinced that Kenny Dalglish, as much as I admire him as my favourite player, up there with Henrik Larsson of all time. As a player, he was absolutely stupendous for Celtic and for Liverpool, and I thought for Scotland. But as a manager, I think he relied on his assistants, and I don't think he was that committed to Celtic when he was here in his sort of supervisory director of football role. I think he spent a lot more time playing golf with Alan Hansen and Graham Souness and stuff down in Liverpool, which of course is where his family was lived. So his wife was, his daughter and stuff were, and other kids and stuff were still down there. His main house was down there. Yes, I think Martin O'Neill coming in as an advisory role, a supervisory role, a sounding board for the manager, brilliant idea. Maybe also a sounding board for the Nicholsons and the Lawwells and the Dermot Desmonds, and a sounding board for Paul Tidsdale, the head of scouting, the head of recruitment, all these people. I think having someone with Martin O'Neill's experience of managing at the highest level in different countries, big success obviously as a Celtic manager, relative success managing 2 or 3 different clubs in England, relative success managing internationally. He is a player who has watched football all over the world. Since he's kind of retired as a manager, he's been a pundit for a variety of different TV channels. He very much keeps himself up with football and transfers and players. He's on the top radios on various different TV channels. So I think O'Neill would be a great person to have an overarching role, an advisory role, possibly advising, as I say, the manager, possibly advising scouting and recruiting, possibly advising the finance people and the board people, the Nicholsons and the Mackays and stuff. I think that would be a brilliant idea. It would be a relatively novel idea having that sort of role, but and it would be sort of changing the sporting director type of role, but I think it would be a brilliant role. Yes. There would be that would be a question. Would be whether O'Neill could carry on talking on radio things and TV things and appearing every now and again at talking events and stuff. So the question would be whether he still could have that role as a pundit and as a media personality, whilst also having the role at Celtic. To a small extent, Gordon Strachan's kind of got this role at Dundee. Not massively successful, his role at Dundee, but he's kind of got that sort of role that you're proposing for Martin O'Neill. He seems to have that sort of role at Dundee. He's not done an awful lot of media stuff since that, but there certainly would be potential conflicts of interest for Martin O'Neill to be that role at Celtic, but then also on talking to Jim White and Jordan on radio, and then going to talk to Kelly Dalglish on Match of the Day or whomever on Sky Sports and stuff. So there would be a potential conflicts of interest of O'Neill rather having knowledge of stuff going on at Celtic, which he couldn't mention when he's on television, etc. So, so whether Martin O'Neill would like to do that, I don't know. If he did do that'd be brilliant. So if we could bring him in, I don't know. It's a very good theory. It's a very good proposal, and I think it would be met with a lot of enthusiasm among Celtic fans. Whether it's a role Martin O'Neill would want to do, I have a feeling that he's quite happy doing his media pundit role. I think he's quite happy coming to do little public relations type things and award-winning ceremonies and stuff. I'm not sure he wants to get back to being involved in a football club day in, day out, or a few days a week. I may be misinterpreting what Chris Sutton. Chris Sutton obviously was leading a lot of the criticism of Celtic for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, saying some stuff about Celtic that was massively negative, and I think it also would have been pretty damaging for player morale, in that you've got this great Celtic hero, a player that was a great player for Celtic since he's left Celtic. He's become a real big media personality, still massively admired by the fans, still admired quite a bit by people at the club, the board, etc. Still do like Chris Sutton coming back. I think he was incredibly critical of the board, incredibly critical of Rodgers, incredibly critical of the players, and I think that's probably been counterproductive. Just felt in the last week or so he's been tailing off his criticism and trying to be a bit more accommodating and praiseworthy, and talking about how the best signing of all the signings in Scotland this summer was Benjamin Negreen, that he's a brilliant signing for Celtic, he's a very good player. Some of the comments that Sutton's been making the last day or two, I think, have been much more positive, because maybe he feels that he's been too negative and it's been playing into the hands of Rangers and Hibs and Hearts He's been playing into the hands of a lot of the media personalities down south, playing into the hands of the Chris Boyds and the Michael Stewarts, etc. Because by goodness, have the Stephen Thompsons, the Michael Stewarts, the Chris Boyds really laid into Celtic in the last couple of weeks, really laid into the Celtic board with that statement. So I think a lot of non-Celtic ex-players and non-Celtic fan journalists have really lumped onto Celtic, and have really enjoyed giving Celtic a good kicking for the last 2 or 3 weeks, which is why I think Celtic as a club and as a fan base and ex-players should all be coming together to talk off the same hymn sheet, metaphorically, or at least all appear that we're positive and moving in the right direction. Yes, so a lot of people say about Chris Sutton and about Chris Boyd that they just talk, and Michael Stewart to a lesser extent, they just say what they think, and they're no nonsense and stuff. I think sometimes people like Sutton, Robbie Savage, Chris Boyd, I think sometimes they deliberately say things to be as controversial as they can because it keeps on getting them media gigs. Michael Stewart was a decent player for Hibs and Hearts, but he has created for himself a real niche in terms of being a Scottish football pundit, variety channels, BBC, independent channels, radio, etc. Based on not a terribly successful career before, but because he's been quite controversial, he's got himself a niche. Chris Sutton, much more successful player, but he and Robbie Savage created a niche of being quite controversial and talking and saying what it is. There are several players, ex-players on English talk sports radio, they're much the same, who've made careers by being rude, confrontational, and often very, very biased. So, yes, Chris Sutton, no nonsense guy. I think sometimes he overstates his opinions to create controversy. I think he quite likes riling up the Kenny Millers and the Michael Stewarts and the Chris Boyds, etc. I think he quite likes the confrontation. I think he quite likes the argument. I think sometimes he deliberately provokes an argument for the sake of keeping his media profile up. I thought Gordon Strachan not the biggest favourite of Celtic fans at the time. He's been a wee bit more accepted more recently now that he's an old Celtic manager. I think he had a fine time as a Celtic manager. Didn't have the best of players. I think we actually kind of think that he had a better quality of players than he actually had. Celtic's squad was kind of tailing off from before with the Martin O'Neill years. It kind of tailed off a bit with some of the players that Gordon Strachan had. He got us into the last 16 of the old-fashioned Champions League format. He won some cups, won some leagues for Celtic. I think he was a pretty decent Celtic manager, all things considered. And I think Paul's point is very valid, that he maybe didn't have the same quality of players that O'Neill had, and later on that Rodgers into Lennon into Postecoglou had, in contrast. Yes, Willow Flood did come from Dundee United. Wasn't a big success at Celtic. I think he was a gigantic big Celtic fan. It was his dream was to come to Celtic, a bit like Luke McCown's dream apparently was to come to Celtic. I think Luke McCown's been of our transfer window last season. I think Luke McCown's turned into exactly what he was bought for, which was to be a player coming off the bench, a player who could make a difference to the game in the last 10, 15, 20 minutes, a player who could start games for Celtic at that lower level. I think he's been a success in terms of his role. I don't think he's got the ability to take that one step further to be a star player at the highest level in Europe or really high level in Scotland. I don't think he's a Rio Hatate, a Benjamin Negreen. I think Arnie Engels has that ability. Just I don't think he's settled into Celtic. Be that himself, be that Brendan Rodgers. Must be quite a kick in the confidence for Arnie Engels that he's dropped down to being the backup midfielder. I think certainly Willow Flood was a poor signing for Celtic when we weren't being terribly ambitious. Now, Artur Boruc was one of my all-time favourite goalkeepers. Apparently, also a massive character at Celtic. Also, didn't get on terribly well with teammates or with management or with discipline as well. Reportedly, quite often turned up to training still under the influence of alcohol from the night before. So I don't know whether that's true or not. It's not terribly professional to turn up to training still quite hungover from the night before, but I don't think Boruc ever really let us down on the pitch in terms of his goalkeeping. Big personality, big fan of his as well. You're quite right. Willie Collum and Willow Flood do look remarkably similar to each other. I didn't properly read the article, but apparently Willie Collum's been going around all the Scottish clubs talking about changes to VAR for this season. I didn't really properly read the article as to find out what Willie Collum's actually saying is going to change about VAR this season. There are plans apparently for Willie Collum to do a regular feature on Sky Sports explaining refereeing decisions. He did that, I thought, quite successfully last season, once a month via a YouTube channel. I think that's probably the right format for Willie Collum. I think being involved in Sky Sports, I think, can sensationalise things. I think it was another comment that was made in that board statement was the fact that the transfer market, the transfer speculation is nowadays so commoditized and so front and center. I don't remember in the good old days transfer speculation, transfers in and out of clubs got anywhere near the press conference or the press coverage or TV coverage as they do nowadays. The last couple of days of the transfer window on Sky Sports, it was like 24 hours a day. It was all these proposed moves, possible moves, reporters outside of grounds, etc. And certainly the transfer market the last 5 years or so has, particularly when Sky's got involved with it, has very much turned into a very commoditized, publicized exercise. And I think transfers actually probably work out best when a lot of the stuff is done behind the scenes, and the first you really know that a player's coming to the club is when there they are being announced at a press conference in their new green and white strip, and they're doing an interview for the press, an interview for Celtic TV and stuff. Yep. Artur Boruc, yes, certainly. As I said, one of my absolute favourite Celtic goalkeepers of all time, if not my favourite Celtic goalkeeper of all time. He had that bit of swagger and magic and rule breaking about him that I like in a lot of players. One of the reasons I quite liked Jota, Paolo Di Canio, Pierre Van Hooijdonk, Georgie Cadetti, all players that were happy to break the rules, but they all also had this sort of magic and specialness about them. we've had a nice three, 3 hours and 20 minutes of talking. I was quite surprised that it's actually been that long. Personally, I am really hopeful that starting today, i.e. Thursday, or starting tomorrow, Friday, that Celtic are going to get all their players together. They're all back after the international break. They're going to have a good training session on Thursday, yesterday, stroke today, depending on when we started, Friday and Saturday, and we're all going to come out, fans, players, board, support staff, etc., are all going to come out roaring on Sunday afternoon against Kilmarnock. We're going to play like we did when we went there and won 5-0 away from home. Brilliant start to the game, 3-0 up at half time, 2 more goals in the second half, and then that was us winning the championship. I really want Celtic to come out all guns blazing, on the front foot, taking Kilmarnock on. Yes, we certainly have had plenty to talk about. We've had plenty of things to debate, discuss. We've had lots and lots of different opinions that we can share. We've got lots of different ways about how we think Celtic should go forward. If people want to protest, if people want to not buy merchandise, if people want to go to the ground and not cheer and shout for the players and support them, that's their right. If people want to turn up late for games and go in after 12 minutes, if people want to leave the game 12 minutes early at the other end, all well and good. But if people are going to turn up late and leave early, they've also got to accommodate other fans who don't want to do that, and also accommodate the stewards and police and the ground staff at those grounds, because it's going to cause them quite logistical problems and safety problems with lots of fans coming and going all in one big lump. So I do hope that if that's the way that those fans are going to behave and how they're going to lead their protest, it's got to be working with the away clubs and got to be working with the home clubs and working with the police and stewards at those different places. Otherwise, it could be chaos and it could be a lot of people hurt. And that's the last thing I want to see, having been being a Liverpool fan and having Heysel and Hillsborough in my memory, or as I said, the village I live, a lot of people in my village, were affected by the Ibrox disaster at the end of the 60s, because it was their school friends at the primary school, year 7, or year 1 at the high school that died in that. It was their friend, that was their fellow striker, it was their goalkeeper, etc., that died in the Ibrox. So I do think fan safety is such an important thing. So Celtic's actually had lots of good goalkeepers. Fraser Forster, a great goalkeeper. I like Craig Gordon an awful lot. Pat Bonner was a very good servant for Celtic. The first goalkeeper I really remember at Celtic was Peter Latchford. Not the greatest a goalkeeper, but a goalkeeper who did very well for Celtic for many, many years. Rab Douglas was the main goalkeeper for many years under Martin O'Neill in the glory years. He did a perfectly good job. So Celtic's had some brilliant goalkeepers in my memory. I'm a wee bit too young to remember Ronnie Simpson. That then led into, I think it was Evan Williams was the goalkeeper in the very early 70s. He was kind of just retiring and moving on when I started supporting Celtic in 71, 72. So, but probably my favourite goalkeeper for Celtic of all time has been Artur Boruc, for a lot of different reasons, not just for his ability to keep goal, but also his personality, his vibrancy, his sense of fun, etc. Yeah, I can perfectly see that. As I said, someone my dad knew from the village that I was born and grew up in. massive Celtic fan. He was a boy who went with his Rangers friends from my village I now live in to Ibrox, and he leads a yearly wreath laying type thing at the memorial in our village for the 6 kids that died from our village in the Ibrox disaster. So, so David Connor, I can perfectly see where your dad's coming from. I think that would be really traumatic. So the guy who was my dad's friend kept on attending Celtic matches. He was the head of the Celtic Supporters Association in the neighbouring bigger town near where I live up until quite recently. So he carried on supporting the club, carried on going to Celtic matches. But I can perfectly understand why someone would not want to go back to watch football, having had that awful experience. I think he's been Pat Bonner, brilliant goalkeeper for Celtic. I think he's underestimated. I think people don't actually give him the credit and the esteem that he deserves. Kept goal for Celtic for such a long time. He rarely ever let Celtic down. He very rarely let down the Ireland international team. There is quite a big incident with, I think it was Romania with him, but he hardly ever let Celtic down. He's been a good, loyal ex-Celtic player on radio and TV, etc. So massive credit to Pat Bonner, Packy Bonner. Yeah. Okay. So hopefully, if the fans do go through with their promise of having a 12-minute protest outside the ground and then going in as a mass lump of Celtic fans, that they do work with the police and the stewards to ensure that everybody is safe going into the ground, that the fans who are already in are safe, and that there's no confrontations between fans who don't take part in that boycott and the fans that do. There's not been terribly many players who've played for both clubs. Obviously, Alfie Collin, Kenny Miller, Maurice Johnston. I can't think of Stephen Presley. Didn't Stephen Presley played for both clubs as well? It'd be quite interesting to see it happen nowadays. Be surprising if we saw a player play for both clubs in the near future. Although maybe the new owners of Rangers will change the way that Rangers are as a football club. Yeah, I think like any goalkeeper is a position, as Kasper Schmeichel proved in last year's cup final against Aberdeen. It's a position where if you do make a mistake, it's often quite catastrophic, leads to a goal. Obviously, Kasper Schmeichel's mistake in the cup final let Aberdeen back into the game, allowed them to draw the game, allowed them to take it to extra time and then to penalties. I don't think Aberdeen were really threatening the Celtic goal. It was kind of a speculative cross from, I think it was Shaden Morris, and then Schmeichel deflected it into the goal. So I think all goalkeepers are prone to errors. Yeah. So I think we should. So I think looking ahead to the game on Sunday against Kilmarnock, just to finish things off for the day, for the evening. I am very hopeful. A few people I've talked with so far are suggesting a 2-0 win for Celtic. One of the people who regularly sends in comments, chap who lives in South Africa, he's predicting a 5-0 win for Celtic. I think a 5-0 win for Celtic on Sunday against Kilmarnock would be absolutely brilliant. I'd happily take any win for Celtic on Sunday, especially if they start to play the sort of football that I want Celtic to be playing. My current prediction, assuming that Celtic have all their players fit and able to play, would be a 2-0 win, 3-0 win. Yep. Pat McLaughlin 2-0, perfectly fine. Pat McLaughlin, a very skilled person at predicting results and so on. So I'd go with 2-0 as well. I am confident that Celtic are going to win the game. I'm confident that Celtic are going to turn things around. I think it's going to take a lot of hard work for Brendan Rodgers. It's going to take a lot of hard work for McGregor and the players. But Brendan Rodgers is being paid £3 million a year, and it's probably time he starts giving Celtic £3 million a year. 3-1, yep, Stephen, 3-1, 2-1, 3-1, 2-0. Anything is lovely. I'm all for it. 3-0. Yep. All these are good. I think, David Connor, you also are highlighting an opinion that a lot of Celtic fans probably have at the moment, and I think it's entirely understandable. I've rarely ever said, as I said about right at the start of the live stream, I've rarely seen Celtic play so badly, so many games in a row. The Kira Almaty games, those 0-0s against those two, and then the 0s against Rangers. I've rarely seen Celtic string together 3 games out of 4 and play so absolutely abysmally. A clean sheet. Someone was talking about clean sheets. I think a clean sheet's a very, very high likelihood. I think Celtic are strong at defence. No matter who is our back 4, I think we've got strong defenders there who actually work together well as a team. I think Tierney's fitted in very well at left back into that team. The other ones obviously been playing together for a season or two. I do think that Celtic do have players from midfield, out wide, and through the middle who can and will score goals for Celtic. But chance creation needs to be better, and efficiency, putting those chances away, needs to be better. Ida wasn't very good at putting chances away against St Mirren. He missed about 4 chances. Johnny Kenny, when he was starting, he had several chances that he missed. Dijsselmeyer has not been terribly good at converting his chances, which is kind of why we've relied on quite a few goals. 3 goals, I think it's 4 goals from Nygren. So very few things would give me more happiness and pleasure than to see Kelechi Iheanacho score 2 or 3 goals on Sunday. I think that's probably ambitious, but if he plays like he did when he played for Man City, then played for Leicester, he is going to score lots and lots of goals in Scotland. And he's got height, he's got speed, he's 2-footed, he's got good instincts in and around the box, can score with head, right foot, left foot. He sets up other players. He played very well alongside and with Jamie Vardy at Leicester. If he is near how good he was, he's going to be I think if he's so he got 1 goal at Middlesbrough. With the greatest respects to Middlesbrough is a different team to Celtic if Celtic's playing the way that Celtic can play. The level of opponent that Iheanacho was having at Middlesbrough, the manager at Middlesbrough is very different to any manager he'd had before. So I fully accept that he scored 1 goal in 15 games for Middlesbrough. He had a very disappointing time across in playing for Sevilla. He's kind of dropped out of Nigerian full international squads. His career has had a bit of a lull. But there are plenty of players who've had a bit of a lull and then come back just as strong, having had a wee spell not playing at such a higher level. So I do agree with I do agree with Paul. I think it's good to be positive. A lot of people have said about my videos, my comments, my replies, that I always tend to be very, very positive about things. I personally think it's so much better to be positive than be negative. It makes me so much happier as a person, as a Celtic fan, to be positive. It does mean every now and again you get let down, but I'm a great believer in footballing terms and Celtic terms to believe the best, to be optimistic, to always see the bright side of life, the positive side of life. In real life, I'm a bit more pessimistic and realistic, but in football, I want to be really, really positive because it makes me a lot happier to be positive. Which is why I also want other Celtic fans to be as positive and supporting of the club as possible, because that would make me happier as well. I don't like fans protesting. I don't like fans threatening to be silent or turn up late or do this, that, and the other. But they can do what they like. It's up to them. Yes, everybody has perfect right to be themselves. People, as I said, I tend to be pessimistic in some parts of my life, but in football, I have always been 100% optimistic, even in the awful years of the 80s and 90s when we hardly won anything at all for 15 years. I was still very, very hopeful, and eventually in came Vin Janssen. The club turned around, and it really turned around under Martin O'Neill, and the last 15 years have been pretty much of a dream. Happily, that looks like it's going to get phased out. I'm not a great fan of plastic pitches. I think they have their roles, I think, for being practice pitches so that you can train all year round. I think it's smaller clubs, possibly plastic pitches does allow them not to have to spend tons of money on understyle heating, but I don't think plastic pitches is a good idea in the long run. Playing on grass is far, far better. So I think we've been talking for 3.5 hours. I think we'll call it a day. Thank you so much to everybody who's put in so many brilliant comments. When I started doing these 5-6 weeks ago, I was worried that no one would attend them, no one would talk, no one would converse, no one would discuss. It's all been an absolute dream, and it gives me so much pleasure to do them. Planning to do a few more Thursday evening live streams. Not sure when it comes to start playing the Europa League matches in 2-3 weeks' time against Belgrade. Whether we'll carry on doing them on a Thursday evening or move them to another evening. There is the option of doing a post-match live stream and then extending that post-match live stream to being a late night live stream like we're doing at the moment. So maybe near the time I'll do maybe next time I'll do a wee bit of a near the time I'll do a little poll on the channel just to see whether people want to have a go at a post-match live stream running into a post-match live stream and then general discussion stream, or whether we move it to a different evening. But we'll cross that bridge in a couple of weeks' time when we start playing Europa League games on a Thursday. So I think we'll call it a day or call it a night. We've moved from Thursday into Friday. Some of you, I'm sure, have got work in the morning. Happily, all I've got tomorrow to do is housework and laundry and shopping and cooking and stuff. Happily, I'm semi-retired and able to do these videos and these live streams. So thank you for all the nice comments. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Paul McEwen. Thank you, David Connor. Thank you, everybody who's contributed. We'll do the same again next Thursday. And so what we'll say is good night. Thank you very much. And good luck, Celtic, on Sunday. And hail, hail.